more dramatic than in manufacturing. To keep pace, today's manufacturers must have access to the latest information on technologies, market forces, business processes, and workforce skills. National Technological University and the National Institute of Standards and Technology present Modern Manufacturing, the National Video Conference Series for Successful Small Firms. This series offers you the opportunity to focus on technology applications, business processes, and manufacturing concepts that will improve the manufacturing competitiveness and productivity of small and medium-sized manufacturers. It allows you to take advantage of live satellite delivery to provide needed information and training in a timely, effective manner while minimizing learners' time commitment and cost of travel. And it will provide valuable networking opportunities for manufacturers. Thank you for joining us. And now to today's program. Hello and welcome to Modern Manufacturing, the National Video Conference Series for Successful Small Firms. I'm Mike Jackson, and I'll be the moderator for today's interactive satellite seminar, which is coming to you live from Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo. We are pleased that so many of you, viewers from across all 4 of our time zones, are part of our satellite network. Thanks for joining us. Our seminar today is sponsored by National Technological University and the Modernization Forum. Headquartered in Dearborn, Michigan, the Modernization Forum is an association of organizations that provide hands-on technical assistance to smaller manufacturers. Through service to its members, the Forum plays a vital role in the growing national infrastructure for manufacturing extension and industrial modernization. Our program today is QS-9000, the new Automotive Supplier Quality Standard. Last year, the QS-9000 Quality Systems Requirements Manual, a document that harmonizes the fundamental quality systems manuals and assessment tools of the automotive Big Three into basically one format, was introduced to the automotive supplier community. The document was created by Chrysler, Ford, and General Motors in order to create a common quality requirement that, when implemented by the entire supply chain, would improve the overall automotive industry. In today's seminar, we will get a snapshot view of the system's 23 elements. We will learn about the implications of QS-9000 to lower-tier automotive suppliers, and we'll hear how to prepare for the assessment process. We will have, during the course of the program, 2 question and answer periods featuring our seminar speakers and guest panelists, and there will be 2 ways we will take your questions during the program. First, throughout the seminar, we will take your questions by fax. The fax number is 1-616-387-5332. I'd like to encourage you to fax your questions in at any time during the seminar, and if you would, please be certain to include your name and your telephone number, just in case we need to contact you to seek any clarifications. And then, during the question and answer period, we will take your questions live on our toll-free telephone line. That number is 1-800-318-5751. The presenters for today's program are the members of the Chrysler, Ford, and General Motors Supplier Quality Task Force. They are the primary authors of the QS-9000 Quality Systems Requirement document. So, to begin our seminar, let me introduce today's task force members. First, we have Russ Jacobs, Manager of Supplier Quality Planning in Chrysler Corporation Supplier Development Organization. Then we have Dan Reed, Manager of Supplier Development and Supplier Quality for Worldwide Purchasing for General Motors. And Stephen Waltz, Supplier Quality Requirements Manager of the Corporate Quality Office for Ford Automotive Operations. In addition to these presenters, throughout the program today, we will also be hearing some high-level insights into QS-9000 from a team of senior executives from the Big Three. Let me introduce them to you. Norm Ehlers, Vice President of Facilities, Materials, and Services Purchasing for Ford Motor. Harold Kuttner, Vice President of Worldwide Purchasing, Production Control, and Logistics for General Motors. And Thomas Stallkamp, Vice President of Procurement and Supply and General Manager of Large Car Operations for Chrysler. Let's begin our program with their answers to a fundamental question, and that is, why establish a common quality system for suppliers?
really a good question, and regardless of the competitive situation between the domestic vehicle manufacturers, I can assure, especially the supplier community, that we spend a lot of time listening to our suppliers, and much of the input that we've received over the past few years is that we have many business practices that are in conflict with one another, which really don't affect the competitive situation between the vehicle manufacturers, but it does create waste or non-value-added costs for our suppliers. So we have had task teams in place and certainly have been actively pursuing processes such as the quality process that we're rolling out today to our supplier community to eliminate the duplication of resources to really obtain a common objective. And of course, that common objective is to improve our customer satisfaction. And without our supplier community working on common processes, eliminating waste, and improving the quality of parts and systems coming into our vehicle plants, we can't accomplish our primary mission of customer satisfaction.
The biggest thing is the fact that it's going to reduce their overhead. It's going to reduce some of their costs because they have complained to us on numerous occasions, and righteously so, that what they're faced with is the same basic requirement, but one supplier would ask for it to be done in one format, one OEM would ask for it in one format, another OEM would ask for it in a second format, and then a third. The end result would be the same, but the method of getting there would be different. So by making it the same requirement, we ought to be able to reduce the overhead costs or the cost of doing business for the supplier in meeting our quality requirements.
Now it's time for the first of our presentations coming to you live here from the studio. Our first presenter will be Russ Jacobs from Chrysler. Russ will explain the history of QS-9000, and he will give us an overview of its key elements. Go ahead, Russ.
Thank you, Mike, and good morning, viewing audience. We're delighted to be with you this morning. I think perhaps a few remarks about the history of standards development are appropriate before I talk about QS-9000 history. You know, the history of standards development in QS-9000 types of standards for quality go back over 30 years to the period following World War II. Actually, before World War II, industry was of a cottage nature, and suppliers and customers were very close to one another, and communication was much easier to take place. But after the war, as the Industrial Revolution took place, suppliers and customers became separated with further and further distances, and it became more and more necessary to have some standard understandings of how to proceed, and that led to the development of various quality standards. They took place first in military and then moved on to areas in industry and in national standards for companies and countries. Perhaps one of the first of significance for the automotive industry was in 1965 when General Motors released their General Quality Standard. But shortly thereafter, we had more standards that were developed on an industry and on a country basis. Canada in 1975, also Australia in 1975, and perhaps one of the most significant was in 1979 when the British introduced their first common standard, which I might add was the precursor to the ISO 9000 series that we will be talking a little bit about today. Ford followed up in 1981 with their rather well-known global automotive standard, Q101, and 2 years later, Chrysler followed with their Supplier Quality Assurance Program. And as I mentioned, in 1987, the ISO 9000 series was first published, and that was the first voluntary set of quality standards. The need for standardization is perhaps greater now than it's ever been. The lack of standard terminology, i.e. multiple terms for the same concept, and single terms with multiple meanings has caused considerable confusion throughout industry. Proliferation of various standards, both across countries, across industries, and especially across companies in Tier 1 suppliers, has added to the confusion. and differing documentation requirements and differing rating schemes have added to this confusion. That's the scenery that we saw ourselves dealing with when the task force was originally commissioned. And perhaps a little note about the formation of the Quality Requirements Task Force is appropriate at this time. Actually, our origin began in the summer of 1988 when the American Society for Quality Control sponsored a conference, at which time numerous suppliers were extremely vocal about their concern about the lack of combination between the big three and their quality requirements. Shortly after that conference, the OEM VPs of procurement at Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler got together and commissioned an OEM task force. The task force commission was to harmonize supplier quality manuals and format. They were instructed, however, initially to concentrate on tactical projects as opposed to the more strategic objective, which was a common quality system standard. Projects that were originally delivered under that tactical mission were documents such as measurement systems analysis and fundamental statistical process control. That was followed by what came to be the very first production part approval process document shared by the big three, and in fact was the first common set of requirements that was issued by the task force. That activity was followed by a potential failure mode and effects analysis for design and process, and culminated in an advanced product quality planning and control plan document. Next slide, please. QS-9000 integrates the OEM supplier quality standards of Chrysler, their quality assurance program, Ford's Q101 program, and GM's Targets for Excellence program. These standards, the QS-9000, were also adopted at their point of issuance by the heavy-duty truck manufacturers in the U.S., and in fact those truck manufacturers cooperated in assisting in developing the QSA, or Quality System Assessment companion document to QS-9000. QS-9000 was first issued in August of 1994, and a second edition was published in February of 1995. The purpose of QS-9000 is to define the quality system expectations for both internal and external suppliers of production and service parts and materials to ensure customer satisfaction, beginning with conformance to requirements and continuing with reduction of variation and waste to the benefit of the final customer, the suppliers, and the OEMs. You might ask, what is a quality system? A quality system is the organizational structure, the responsibilities, procedures, processes, and resources for implementing quality management. Quality management is that aspect of the overall management function that determines and implements the quality policy. QS-9000 contains three separate and distinct sections. Section 1 is based on the fundamental ISO 9001 series 1994 revision. It, however, contains in almost every element interpretations and additional automotive requirements unique to the big three. In Section 2, we supplemented the 20 elements in Section 1 with 3 additional elements dealing with the sector-specific requirements of the production part approval process, the continuous improvement initiatives, and manufacturing capabilities. Section 3 of QS-9000 is actually a testimonial to the task force inability to completely finish our assignment. In other words, it contains some minimal customer-specific requirements that we were unable to satisfy and agree on a common approach to in either sections 1 or 2. A series of appendices and a glossary concludes the content in QS-9000. And as I mentioned before, the first edition was issued in August of 1994 and is still in effect to the end of the year, and it was followed in February of 1995 with the second edition. Some of you may be asking, what exactly is ISO 9000? ISO 9000 is actually a series of standards. ISO 9000 is a guideline for selecting ISO standards to be used and applied. 9001 is the standard for full service or design responsible suppliers, as well as manufacturing. 9002 is the standard for those suppliers that only manufacture components. 9003 is the standard for distributors with no manufacturing capability. And 9004 provides a guideline for quality system elements. As I mentioned before, Section 1 of QS-9000 is based on the fundamentals of ISO 9001. All 20 elements of ISO 9001 are repeated in Section 3 with appropriate notes for understanding and additional requirements that are automotive sector specific. Section 2 deals with the specific requirements of the automotive sector and begin with element 21, the production part approval process that we refer to as PPAP, where the specific details of new sample part submission are documented and detailed. Element 22 deals with the topic of continuous improvement, both on the manufacturing floor as well as in the administrative areas, and we will be hearing more about that later. And element 23 deals with manufacturing capability, both on the manufacturing floor from a tooling and equipment standpoint and from a facilities standpoint. Section 3 of QS-9000 deals with the unique requirements of the Big Three. Actually, the task force mission, including commonizing only the fundamental quality system requirements. The requirements and interpretations in this section are over and above those fundamentals, but are nevertheless necessary for a customer to establish the proper understanding and working relationship with their customer. Specific questions regarding the content of Section 3 should be directed to your specific customer. The appendices and glossary of QS-9000 is intended to enhance understanding and give direction to those that are using the document. So therefore, the elements or appendices both deal with supplier concerns as well as third-party registrars' concerns. In the second edition, for example, of QS-9000, we have added 2 appendices. Appendix G deals with accreditation body requirements, and Appendix H deals with the minimum number of survey days required for an on-site audit. Mike, I think that pretty well wraps up the history and the content of QS-9000.
Thank you, Russ, and I think that'll provide a really good foundation as we move forward today. Let's check in now once again with our senior team from the Big Three. This time, the question we put to them was, why use QS-9000? Why not simply tell suppliers to go with ISO 9000?
Initially, when the ISO 9000 came out, we looked at it because we knew many companies were adapting the ISO 9000, either because their customers insisted upon it or they thought it was a good thing to do. And since it is an international standard, it would only be logical that we would look at it and see if it would suffice for our needs. Now, we found it to be a good document, but we found it lacking in certain areas. For example, it does not have advanced quality planning in it. It does not have a provision for continuous improvement. So what we decided to do instead is use it as a base, as a foundation for the quality standard that's coming out, the QSR, and then add those things to it that we thought was lacking. So I think we've got the best of 2 worlds here. We've got a very familiar foundation, which many people are working on, but we've added to it those very critical elements that we think makes an outstanding quality system in our eyes.
Well, there's been a lot of publicity about ISO 9000 in recent years. And what we find is that ISO is a good overall umbrella, But in fact, there are areas of our common quality standard that is in fact improved over ISO, particularly in the advanced quality planning area that's so important as we bring out new vehicles. So we think this doesn't do anything but augment and strengthen ISO 9000. In fact, if you follow the Big Three's common approach, you'll be well on your way to ISO, meeting the ISO requirements. And it should be easier for a supplier to become ISO certified if he uses the common quality standards.
Well, now that we're familiar with the origins of QS-9000, we're going to move on to our second studio presenter. That'll be Dan Reed from General Motors. Dan's going to build on Russ's overview by giving us some details on the 23 key elements that comprise the QS-9000 requirements. On to you, Dan.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you this morning representing General Motors and the task force. We'd like to talk just a little bit about the concept of the quality system documentation and how documentation within a supplier should be formatted going forward. And to begin that, I'd like to describe what we did with developing QS-9000. We took ISO 9001 and incorporated that into the QS-9000 as the fundamental or the base, and then we added the interpretations, automotive interpretations to that. We've also included the production part approval, as Russ said, was one of our earlier requirements manuals, and other customer-specific standards. And what we're asking suppliers to do is to take that as input, along with the appropriate reference manuals that we've previously published, and build a quality system documentation surrounding a level 1 quality manual, basically a 25 or 35 page manual that defines the approach, the responsibility for each element of the quality system. Really, if you think about it, it's not the traditional quality manual that you've seen, the big thick manuals. It's really more or less an assessor's guide through the system, defining, as I said, the approach and responsibility. That should be linked with level 2 standard operating procedures, which defines further who does what and when. And then that should link also to level 3 job instructions, which includes things like setup instructions, rework instructions, operator instructions, those types of things that answers the question of how the work needs to be accomplished on the floor. Some suppliers could even have a level 4 documentation in their system, which would include things like forms, tags, labels, and records that show that the system is operating as it's concepted. Also, we'd like to define some terms that are used in both the quality system requirements and the quality system assessment. The terms shall, will, must, these are mandatory requirements that must be met. Should is also a requirement, but it really is has some flexibility around it. It's a preferred approach, but if the supplier has an alternate approach that meets the intent of the requirements, it's okay. But it really does not give suppliers an option to opt out of doing the requirement that's referred to in the should clause. So it really is requirements with flexibility. Notes are for guidance and not part of the requirements, and that's consistent within the ISO text and the text that we've added. However, appendices in the back that Russ talked about earlier are, in fact, part of the requirements. Also, I'd like to contrast a couple terms that you'll see over and over. Documentation is basically information that defines the process that's to be followed, while records prove that that process was executed and records the results of that. Further, I'd like to contrast a couple other terms. Procedures generally are used when work is cross-functional, when it goes from department to department. Instructions, on the other hand, are generally used when work is in more than one discipline. You'll also see references to first party, second party, third party in our documents. What that refers to is first party are self-assessments by a supplier. Second party involves a customer audit of a supplier. Third party is conducted by an independent third party, and typically accredited registrars that have an accreditation to a body that we recognize for QS-9000. Now on to some of the key elements of the standard itself. We won't have time to go through all 23, but some of the key ones we think we could go into in a little more detail. First one is a global expectation that really covers the entire company, beginning with top management, and it's called management responsibility. It's out of ISO 9001, clause 4.1, and it calls for a quality policy to define and document the objectives, the policy, the company's commitment to quality, if you will. That quality policy has to be relevant to the customer goals and the customer needs. This is really one of the ways that the voice of the customer is deployed into the supplier's quality system, which is just a key notion. Also, the quality policy has to be understood and implemented and maintained at all levels of the supplier's organization. So if we were to talk with someone on the floor, they have to be able to articulate what the quality policy is for the company and what the commitment is to quality. Further, top management within the company is responsible for putting in place an organization with defined roles and responsibilities with appropriate authority granted to conduct the work affecting, for people affecting quality. They have to provide adequate and trained resources, and this is a key element also, in that it covers a number of the different elements of the standard. You talk about trained resources in the lab for doing inspection and test work. You talk about internal auditors having to have qualifications. Just a number of trained resources are required. Further, the standard requires appointment of a management representative. The management representative is a key notion also in that that person is responsible for the implementation, maintenance, and implementation of the entire quality system. The buck has to stop there. Companies that say everyone's responsible for quality, really, we found that doesn't always work. You have to have the buck stop somewhere, and that's with the management representative in the standard. So it's important that that person be named and has appropriate authority for design controls, 4.4 element, if the supplier is design responsible. Further, under management responsibility, there's a need for organizational interface to ensure the management of the appropriate activities during the concept development stage, the prototype stage, and on into production, in terms of our 4 phases of production. Also, the organization has to use multidisciplinary decision-making, so you get a number of sets of eyes looking at the issues and getting the best possible decisions. And the supplier must be able to communicate data in a customer-prescribed format. This is referring to things like math data requirements early on in the development phase, not into production. Another key element is the management review process. This is not the typical management meeting where you review production schedules and talk about fires of the day that need to be addressed. This is basically a strategic review of the quality system at large with an assessment of the suitability and the continuing suitability and effectiveness of that system for going forward. It is to be conducted at defined intervals, and records of this particular management review must be kept. So this is really a little different kind of a management meeting than what has traditionally been used in management meetings. This review also must include all elements of the quality system, and there's some interpretation around that to suggest maybe that's not the case, but clearly the management review has to cover all 23 elements of the QS-9000 as well as any elements that you've added as a supplier. I mentioned it has to be strategic in scope. Is the company achieving its quality objectives? You're looking at it from a broad, macro kind of a view. Is the system working effectively? If not, should additional quality metrics be established, or should changes in those quality metrics be made? Should system changes be made? Is there technology on the market that's changing that needs to be addressed in the system at large? So this really needs to be a strategic, broad view of the quality system at prescribed intervals going forward. Further, there's a requirement for a business plan. Now, while the business plan is not auditable by a third party, the fact that strategic business planning is going on is auditable. And there really needs to be a business plan in place that encompasses marketing goals, financial goals, plant, facilities plans, research and development, quality objectives, human resource development objectives, a number of topics. So this is not just a quality plan that's been traditional in our industry. This is a more comprehensive, formal, and documented strategic planning kind of a document. It requires use of an objective and valid process to be used in the development of that plan, and that plan should include goals and the plans that cover both short, meaning 1 to 2 years, and long-term, meaning 3 years and beyond. There's also a requirement that the supplier use company-level data. This is basically trend data, not individual points of data, basically trends that are gathered for purposes of comparison inside and outside the industry, benchmarking, if you will, in quality and operational performance to make certain that the company knows what the world-class benchmark is and is doing the gap analysis and moving forward in continuous improvement mode toward world-class. Further, customer satisfaction is a requirement. There has to be a documented process for determining customer satisfaction, in that that is the voice of the customer. Voice of the customer is key in the quality system. You have to understand what that is, and that also includes the other side of that, meaning key indicators of customer dissatisfaction, which is really a separate set of measures altogether. Element 4.2 is the quality system at large. This is another global expectation that applies to the whole company out of ISO 9001. There is a requirement that the supplier establish, document, and maintain a quality system. The quality system is the big picture. It's the resources, the procedures, the entire elements of the system all brought together in a very macro view. And that has to be brought together and described in a level 1 quality manual, as we mentioned, 25 to 35 pages. And that must be linked to a standard operating procedure manual or set of procedures that further defines the quality system. These procedures, level 2, have to be documented, they have to be written down, and effectively implemented. Now, I've heard it said that you have to say what you do and do what you say. That might be a little bit of an oversimplification. However, generally that's true, but there is some flexibility. The degree of documentation really depends on the methods used, the skills needed, the training that's required by personnel involved. So, for example, a foundry operation that has newest person in the plant has 15 years seniority, and they've done the same job for 15 years, not a lot of turnover, no new technology, probably don't need the same level of documentation in that kind of an operation that you would need in a industry where the technology is changing and there's lots of turnover. So it really has some flexibility there. Quality planning is an element that ISO 9000 added in 1994. It was not in the original 1987 version, and we've added some things to that as well. It's a key element going forward for all of our companies to begin spending more of our time and resources in the quality planning phase. And really during quality planning up front, before production, we're saying that the supplier has to define and document how the requirements will be met. They must use our advanced product quality planning with control plan manual in preparing a quality plan. And that quality plan should really culminate in one of the key outputs of the whole process being a control plan. Further, they have to identify the appropriate controls for the process, the appropriate equipment, the necessary resources, and the skills needed for those resources all up front. The compatibility of design and production processes has to be evaluated up front. The updating of techniques and instrumentation, if measurement systems needs to be updated, that capability that needs to be looked at up front. Suitable verification activities at appropriate stages need to be planned. And when we talk about verification activities, we're really talking about inspection and testing activities. And you need to clarify any standards of acceptability up front and get customer concurrence. Preparation of quality records is also a key part of this. Now, we've used in the standard a term called special characteristics. None of the three companies really use that term prior to QS-9000. It's a generic term we came up with to refer to critical or significant or key product characteristics that all three of our companies call by different nomenclature still. Those definitions and those terms are defined for you in Appendix C of QS-9000, so you can see what the differences are between. But these types of characteristics all have to be covered by the Advanced Product Quality Planning team in the planning phase, and the team is really responsible to finalize those characteristics, what those are, for the failure modes effects analysis documents and the control plans in the planning phase. Also, appropriate controls must be in place for all special characteristics in production. So that's a key thing that needs to be nailed down in the planning phase. Further, we've added the requirements out of the Advanced Product Quality Planning Manual that the supplier use cross-functional teams to conduct this quality planning, that they conduct feasibility reviews, which really assesses, again, the compatibility of the design with their build capability and buildability requirements. They also are required to do a process, failure modes, and effects analysis at a minimum. If the supplier is design responsible, that should also include a design FEMA. And these failure modes effects analysis must consider all special characteristics, as we just mentioned. And the emphasis really is on defect prevention, not on defect detection. So we want basically these FEMAs to go through an iterative process to make things more error-proofed and mistake-proofed up front. And we have a document called the Potential Failure Modes and Effects Analysis that Russ Jacobs talked about earlier to give guidance in the development of those documents. Further, under quality planning, I mentioned the control plan is one of the key deliverables of the Advanced Product Quality Planning phase. And the control plans can be done at a system or a subsystem or component level. These two must include all special characteristics, and they must include potentially all three phases. If you're a supplier of prototype, then there has to be a prototype control plan, but all suppliers at a minimum have to do a control plan for the pre-launch phase and then the production phase or the ongoing production phase. And use of appropriate techniques that we define in the Advanced Product Quality Planning Manual need to be covered in that. Now on to element 414. We're going to skip around the standard just a little bit, some of the key concepts. This has to do with corrective and preventative action. We're saying there that the supplier has to have procedures in place for corrective and preventive actions, but the actions taken must be appropriate to the degree of the magnitude of the problems and to the risks that are encountered. So there's some flexibility there in how much needs to be done, how quick. Also, changes to corrective action or preventive action procedures must be recorded. Further, we're suggesting that suppliers, well, we're asking suppliers to use a disciplined problem-solving method. You see the little graphic there on the screen. This is not the thing we're talking about here. We're looking for a disciplined problem-solving method. We're saying that all the OEMs currently have one, and the supplier must prescribe in a customer-prescribed manner where there's external nonconformances. And you might want to refer to customer procedures such as GP5 for General Motors to know how to respond correctly to the external nonconformances that are identified. Further, procedures for corrective action shall include effective handling of customer complaints, reports of product nonconformances, investigating their cause, recording the results of that investigation, and determining the corrective action that's needed. Also applying corrective action controls or process controls to ensure that that action is in fact effective. Really the key here is to make certain that corrective action is put in place to eliminate reoccurrence of problems. Now on to return product test analysis. We're beginning to return more and more parts to suppliers that are non-conforming. When we find those, and dealers are beginning to do this, we're saying where return parts are sent back to the supplier, they must be effectively analyzed, and records of that analysis must be made available to a second or third-party auditor upon request. Corrective action also needs to be initiated where appropriate based on the results of that analysis. Preventative action. Now this is, again, an area of particular focus of the 1994 issue of ISO 9000. There is a requirement for procedures for preventative action that it will include use of appropriate sources of information. This would include things like audit results, records, service reports, customer complaints, those types of things, to be used for the purpose of detection, analysis, and elimination of potential causes of problems. Here the emphasis is on preventing occurrence of problems. Procedures for preventative action shall include the determination of the steps that are needed to address problems, the initiation of appropriate preventative actions, application of controls to ensure that it's effective, and ensuring that the information is submitted for management review. The key thought there is on prevention again. We're trying to get to a point where we have prevention of problems, not detection of problems. And the fact that it's submitted for management review, there is a note in 414 there that talks about this must be submitted for management review. That's not meant to indicate that that only is the element that has to be submitted for management review. As we mentioned, all elements of the quality system have to be submitted for management review, not just preventative action or any of the other ones that are specifically called out by the standard in that area, such as under Clause D. Another very key concept, a lot of emphasis on in the standard, is internal quality audits. Suppliers have to establish and maintain documented procedures governing the establishment of an internal audit process. They have to have an audit plan and implement internal quality audits, verifying that the activities in the company and in the quality system comply with the plan, and verify that their activities also with internal audit comply with their plan for the audit. Also, they need to determine the effectiveness of the quality system utilizing these audits. It's important that the supplier find the nonconformities in the system and correct them rather than the customer finding them. It'd be better to find them in-house and correct them early before the nonconformities get out. Also, the internal audit has to have a schedule based on the status and importance of the activities that are being audited. Some activities need to be audited more frequently than others. And the audits have to be conducted by independent personnel. That means people that are other than those doing the work. It doesn't have to be an outside company or outside the location, but it has to be someone other than those doing the work. Results of the internal quality audit also has to be reported to the audited department so they can take appropriate action to resolve the issues that are raised. The management is also responsible to take timely corrective action. Here we see some cases management takes a long period of time to bring corrective action resolution, and we're saying that that needs to be timely. The next audit of that area is also to record the effectiveness of the corrective action that was taken based on the nonconformity that was raised in an earlier audit. So we're saying that the next audit cycle ought to go back and verify that the corrective action taken was in fact effective. Internal audit is also an integral part of management review, as we talked about earlier, and suitability of the work environment also must be audited as part of the internal audit. Also, one of the key concepts from our previous supplier quality standards was continuous improvement. And we're saying in QS-9000 that a comprehensive continuous improvement philosophy has to be fully deployed in the supplier location. Suppliers are expected to show continuous improvement in quality, service, and that includes timing and delivery, and price, which could be stated as cost or adding more value to the customer. This is not to be confused with innovative improvements. We still want innovation, obviously, but we're all dependent upon research and development and specialists inside the company to give us those breakthroughs and innovative kind of solutions. And we're saying that's good, but we also want the emphasis on continuous improvement, where each and every one of us every day can make those small incremental improvements, elimination of waste and improvement of lead time and those kinds of things in our day-to-day jobs to make improvements over the long haul. Suppliers also have to develop specific corrective or continuous improvement action plans for processes that are most critical to the customer once those processes have demonstrated stability and acceptable capability. So it's really not sufficient to stop with conformance to requirements. Once you get a stable process and acceptable capability, you want to go on to reduce variation. We're talking with continuous improvement in several areas. For variable data, we're talking about reducing variation around some target or some nominal value. And with attribute data, we're talking about making improvements so that the process is actually perfected and mistakes are not present. A continuous improvement philosophy really should extend to all processes and services in the company to be compliant with the intent of the standard. These are some of the key elements of the standard. There's others that we could talk about: the production part approval process, training, purchasing and subcontractor control, design controls. These are all important elements, but I think this provides a good overview of some of the key concepts that we like to get across today, and appreciate your time. Now I'd like to throw it back to Mike for the next phase. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Dan. I'd like to thank all of you in our audience today for sending in the faxes you've been able to transmit to us so far. I want to encourage you to continue to do that. We'll address your issues in our question and answer period, which will begin in just a couple of moments. The number, once again, is 616-387-5332. Being familiar with the requirements of QS-9000 is just the first step on the road to compliance with the system. Another key issue is identifying who the system applies to. And that's the next question we asked our senior executives from the Big Three.
System standards apply to all production-based suppliers. We're rolling it out to our entire supply base with this document. And eventually it will go worldwide for Chrysler. Our Graz assembly plant in Austria will be using this document, and our Far East joint ventures will also be using it.
Well, currently, as we issue this, it'll apply to the worldwide production and service part suppliers, and also to all of our own manufacturing operations. Long term, as I see it, is we'll also apply it to facilities and tooling suppliers. But they probably require a little adaptation or a little modification in order to meet that, because when you get into the area of facilities and tooling, they have some unique areas that you have to speak to. But to start out with, it's production and service parts worldwide.
Now let's move forward and finish up our formal studio presentations. Steve Walsh from Ford Motor Company is on deck, and he's going to review the assessment process. And that, of course, is a critical factor in achieving overall success when implementing QS-9000. Steve, it's all yours.
Thanks, Mike, and good morning to everybody. I'm going to talk to you about the QS-9000 Quality System Assessment, or QSA. And just let me preface that by saying many people, particularly amongst the supplier community, have indicated that this is probably the most important part of QS-9000. With that thought, I'd suggest that if perhaps you had dozed off during one of the earlier presentations, and I could easily understand how that might have happened, trust me, please be awake for this portion of the broadcast, because this will be of great interest to you, I believe. The third-party assessment can be used by three different groups of customers. First party, for self-assessment amongst suppliers of their own internal quality operating systems. By second party, by Ford, Chrysler, and GM, for example, to assess that supplier's quality operating system in place at that manufacturing site. And by third parties, as independent assessors, to review and audit against the QS-9000 requirements. But this can only be done by registrars and certification bodies who are accredited by a Ford, Chrysler, GM recognized accreditation body, which I will discuss a little bit later, and have also upgraded their scope of operation from ISO 9000 to QS-9000. Only third-party assessments, not for first or second party, can result in QS-9000 registration. This must be in compliance with our requirements as spelled out in QS-9000. This absolutely includes Appendix B, the Code of Practice, Appendix G, the implementation requirements, and Appendix H, the minimum mandate table, as well as the sanctioned interpretations published by the International Automotive Sector Group, IASG, which was formerly called the North American Automotive Sector Group. There are certain key audit definitions that are included within QSA that are very important, and I'd like to go over just to be certain that everyone out there understands what they are. By audit, we're talking about a systematic investigation of the intent, the implementation, and the effectiveness of selected aspects of the quality system. By systematic, we mean planned. By intent, we're talking about, does that quality operating system at the supplier location meet the intent of the standard? And this is determined by looking at the quality system documentation and comparing it to QS-9000. When we talk about implementation, we're talking about deployment. Is it in place? And last but not least, we're looking at effectiveness. Does it fulfill the intent of the QS-9000 elements? The quality operating system is looked at during the audit and results in a status that is binned into three broad categories: pass, fail, and open. Now, by pass, we're talking that no major or minor nonconformities have been identified. By fail, we're talking about more than one major nonconformity exists, and the supplier's quality operating system does not meet the requirements spelled out in QS-9000 at this time. By open, we're talking about one major and or one or more minor nonconformities that exist. However, this status can be upgraded within 90 days of the on-site audit if the supplier does several key things. They are performing a gap analysis that would result in understanding what must happen and preparing a work plan that addresses each one of the nonconformities that was cited during the audit visit. And accompanying that work plan should be documentation that, in fact, what steps they have called out are, in fact, effective and in place to close out that nonconformity. At that point, the auditor would then close it out and issue an ISO 9000 certificate to QS-9000 status. By minor nonconformance, we're talking about a noncompliance with QS-9000 that judgment and experience indicate is not likely to result in the failure of the quality system or reduce its ability to assure controlled processes or products as they're shipped to the customer for utilization. It may be either a failure in some part of the supplier's documented quality system relative to QS-9000, or it could be one or more observed lapses in following one item of the company's quality system. By major nonconformance, we're talking about the absence or total breakdown of a system to meet a requirement of QS-9000. Please bear in mind, and this is very key, that a number of minor nonconformities against any one element of QS-9000 can actually represent a total breakdown of the system and thus be considered a major nonconformity and result in a fail status. A major nonconformance is any noncompliance that would result in then the probable shipment of nonconforming product to the customer. A condition that we feel would result in the failure or materially reduce the usability of the products or services for their intended purpose. A noncompliance is a judgment and experience indicator that is likely to result in the failure of the quality system and or to materially reduce its ability to assure controlled processes and products. I'd also like to point out to you that we feel that opportunities for improvement are key, and we feel that opportunities for improvement are not at all associated with minor or major nonconformities, but in fact represent opportunities cited by the auditor during his walk-around visit that should be noted and provided to the benefit of the customer for their potential employment in improving and upgrading their quality system and become an auditable aspect of future ongoing surveillance audits. The QSA third-party registration has certain key relationships. And first and foremost is the registration certification of that by the national accreditation bodies. Now, each country typically has one accreditation body, and it's usually a governmental agency. To date, we have 9 national accreditation bodies that we have recognized as being in conformance and accepting the QS-9000 requirements as specified in Code of Practice Appendix B and Appendix G, the implementation requirements. Those national accreditation bodies are the NACCB in the United Kingdom, RVC in the Netherlands, RAB here in the United States, JAZAN in Australia and New Zealand, SWEDAC in Sweden, SAS in Switzerland, TGA in Germany, Relay in Spain, as well as CINCERT in Italy. In addition, certain other accreditation bodies are very close to joining those, and those are the Standards Council of Canada, SCC, JAB in Japan, and FINIS in Finland. The next key relationship is that with the registrars. The registrars actually are doing the on-site audit of the supplier's quality system. They are controlled by the national accreditation body. To date, 17 registrars have been certified and approved to conduct QS-9000 audits and grant QS-9000 certification. That information is included in the handout material that many of you have received. However, if you have not received it or would like to get ongoing updates of that material, you should contact the ASQC customer hotline number, which is an 800 number, which will be provided to you later in the program. The other two pieces in the relationship hierarchy are that of the supplier with the registrar, who under contractual arrangement provides for services to be furnished to the supplier that I'll get into a little bit later. And last but not least is the relationship between the OEM and the supplier to provide product and service to us. The third-party registration process typically is a contract arrangement that is in 3 years in duration, even though there is some variation out there on the street. During that 3 years, the registrar must look at each and every element of QS-9000. But before he can do that, he must be accredited by a customer-recognized accreditation body, as I mentioned earlier, and be qualified by that body to conduct QS-9000. That is in accordance with his agreement to comply with Appendix B, the Code of Practice. Certain key steps occur during the certification process by a third party. Now, the supplier may opt to contract for certain pre-audit or pre-assessment visitation to occur prior to the actual on-site registration audit. If in fact that's the case, that will be spelled out in the contractual relationship agreement between the supplier and the registrar. If the on-site audit results in a successful evaluation that is pass, then an ISO 9001 or 2 certificate will be issued, depending on whether or not the supplier has design responsibility, with a QS-9000 stamp affixed to it. The registrar will, is in fact obliged to publish that supplier attaining of ISO QS-9000 status in what we call a registry that is in the public domain and available from certain periodicals. The registrar also is bound by the Code of Practice to conduct a surveillance audit every 6 months. If nonconformities are found at any point during any one of the surveillance audits, the delisting process would then begin, and it is incumbent upon the supplier to address each and every nonconformity found to the satisfaction of the registrar. For quality system registrars making assessments to the QS-9000, we adopted, in fact established, the Appendix B Code of Practice. This resulted in it's a point of interest departure, if you will, that we had many discussions with accreditation bodies and registrar prior to actually developing the Code of Practice. We wanted to find out what was going on the street with ISO 9000 audits and the registration process to ensure that QS-9000 would mean something and have some type of credibility, hopefully at the highest degree, when and if a certificate was issued. What we heard presented a major concern to us, honestly, because we found out that there was great inconsistency and variation in both the breadth and the depth of those on-site registration audits that were occurring with ISO 9000. So given that, we developed the Appendix B Code of Practice to cover all quality system elements that the registrar is bound and obliged to evaluate. He is also obliged to evaluate the effectiveness of system elements. We've defined the surveillance frequency requirements, as I mentioned, every 6 months. We've defined the registrar training requirements and what the registrar on-site team must consist of in regards to automotive experience and having attended and successfully completed the QS-9000 registrar training class, which we developed. Also, this must be included. This Code of Practice Appendix B must be referenced in the contract that's established between the supplier and the registrar. And the accreditation body will use that to control and administer the relationship and the integrity of the audit that the registrar conducts. ISO certificates issued for QS-9000 must bear the stamp of a customer-recognized accreditation body, such as RAB, RVC, and so on and so forth. Now, you might think that's fairly obvious. Yeah, it would just be there. Well, what we found out is that there are, in fact, ISO certificates being issued right now without that stamp affixed. So please be sure that your certificate, if and when you receive it, has the accreditation body stamp affixed to it. It also must identify the scope. In other words, all the products and or services that that supplier is providing from that manufacturing site, the date of the audit, the commodity code or SIC code that many registrars utilize, so that from a tracking standpoint, the proper qualified subject matter experts, in fact, visited that audit supply to witness that supplier and evaluate just how effective the quality operating systems were in place. In addition, if the supplier is design responsible, he would then be obliged to be 9001 certified. There is no exceptions to that. If he does not have design responsibility, then 9002 with a QS-9000 stamp is acceptable. And what we mean is that supplier's engineering centers must be audited, even if those engineering centers or offices are not located on site. If they are in a corporate headquarters or R&D center, it doesn't really matter. Bottom line is the engineering centers must be audited prior to the ISO 9001 certificate being issued. The supplier is in fact design responsible, if you're wondering, if they control the design for any part, for any customer requiring QS-9000. ISO certificates for QS-9000 must include, as I mentioned, all the automotive products from that audited facility, and must include a phrase on the certificate that it was done in accordance with QS-9000 Appendix B Code of Practice. Now, each of us at Ford, GM, and Chrysler have adopted differing registration requirements, which I'd like to take you through to wrap up this third-party overview of the process to obtain third-party registration. General Motors has established a deadline that all their suppliers worldwide must be QS-9000 certified by December 31, 1997. Now, within North America, they've indicated that new suppliers to them must be QS-9000 registered by January 1, 1996. European suppliers to General Motors must be ISO 9000, either 1 or 2, registered by January 1, 1996. That would lead in either case to the supplier being registered by December 1, 1997. Chrysler suppliers, I misspoke, December 31, 1997, excuse me. Chrysler suppliers must be QS-9000 registered by July 31, 1997. And again, just let me be certain that this does apply as I'm talking about this, and it's indicated in the applicability statement in QS-9000 to all production and service part, raw material suppliers, as well as certain suppliers of various finishing operations such as plating, painting, chroming, and heat treating. And to Ford, last but not least, we have not established any registration requirement at this point in time. Our suppliers are not required to pursue or obtain third-party registration at this time. If they obtain it, we will accept it. What a Ford supplier must do is threefold. They must conduct a self-audit, and that should have happened by this point in time. Many suppliers would have found that they are in non-compliance. That will result in a gap analysis being undertaken with an action plan being developed and implemented to address and resolve each and every one of those non-compliances. Now, last but not least, we will come to you when we want that information provided to us. But the supplier should be ready, willing, and able to share, review, and discuss both the self-audit and the work plan that's been implemented at Ford STA request. Now, in regards to second-party assessments, each company will continue that in some way, shape, or form. GM has established that selected one-day audits will occur for certain types of suppliers. And those suppliers, and this also pertains to both Ford and Chrysler, would be for new suppliers, suppliers utilizing new technology or manufacturing processes, as well as suppliers providing componentry to key future program launch requirements. And unfortunately, but very, very real to all of us, those suppliers that require a closer personal relationship due to historical quality concerns and or issues that might have resulted. In that case, Ford and Chrysler will absolutely require that first-party assessment be undertaken and be provided to Ford at Ford STA and Chrysler SQA request, and will utilize second party on a prioritized basis. At this point, no reciprocal recognition is planned between Ford, Chrysler, and GM. Now, just as an overview update, to date, we have created 7 documents. And those documents are QS-9000, QSA, APQP, PPAP, FMEA, MSA, and SPC. We call it affectionately the 7-pack. To date, over 400,000 total manuals have been distributed worldwide. In the case of QS-9000, to date, over 145,000 manuals have been distributed worldwide. Over 700,000 QS-9000 third-party auditors have been qualified. That means taken the QS-9000 sanctioned training and successfully passed the exam. To date, we have recognized 9 accreditation bodies. with the three that I mentioned being very close to receiving formal recognition by us, and qualified over 17 registrars, I believe it's 18 to date, to issue, grant, and certify suppliers to be in conformance with QS-9000. We have completed QS-9000 training for over 8,800 supplier personnel, and we have distributed the sanctioned interpretations to QS-9000 that are published by the International Automotive Sector Group, formerly called the North American Automotive Sector Group, and that material, for your information, is available through ASQC's customer hotline number, which is an 800 number that will be discussed with you and provided to you very shortly by Mike. At this point, that concludes my portion of the presentation. I want to thank you very much and turn it back to Mike.
Okay, Steve, thank you very much. In just a few moments on our program, we will begin our first question and answer session, in which we will take your calls on our live toll-free telephone line. We do encourage you to continue to fax in your questions at any time during the program. That number is 616-387-5332. And when we get to it in a couple of moments, the toll-free voice line number is 1-800-318-5751. By now, many of you might be asking, where can I begin this process? Or you might be saying, well, I'm not really a first-tier supplier, so how does this apply to me? The point is, you do have questions, and we will spend the remainder of our seminar today trying to focus on these two and many other issues. But before we get into that level of detail, we'd like to take just a moment to discuss additional sources of information that are available to you long after this program has ended. And here to guide us in that discussion is Russ Jacobs from Chrysler. Russ, in a nutshell, where should people look if they're trying to make sure they're on the right path?
Mike, obviously that's a very important issue right now because in spite of Steve's admonition, most of us have been asleep for the last 15 minutes. And so therefore it's really important for the supply base to understand exactly where they can get some help. I would think by now obvious that most suppliers would immediately place a call if they haven't already experienced the sanction training from AIAG. To call their number and get a list of the offerings and immediately sign up their personnel to take advantage of the sanctioned, OEM-sanctioned two-day training class on QS-9000 and QSA. Not only will the content and the requirements of QS-9000 be discussed, but also very many helpful hints with respect to implementation and where to get additional help will be provided during those 2 days.
We have a graphic on this matter. Why don't we put it up and take a look at it and make sure we walk through all of the various components of it.
Sure.
This concerns IASG. Tell me what we've got.
Mike, IASG was mentioned a little earlier by Steve. That's an ad hoc group, an international ad hoc group that has been formed recently that's comprised of members of the ISO accrediting body throughout the world, also registrars throughout the world, supplier representatives, and the task force. And we've gotten together in order to address supplier concerns with respect to both requirements and implementation strategies. That group will continue to meet and discuss those questions and concerns that come up during the implementation process and provide rapid answers and definitive positions with respect to the concerns that have been expressed so that suppliers understand and have a single voice, if you will, with respect to how to proceed.
So even though you may be implementing these implementation issues differently, there is a single voice, at least when we get to the IASG level.
Yes.
Good. We do have a couple of telephone numbers we'd like to share with our audience. These are help numbers that will be easy for you to reach out to. I think the IASG number is on there. Let's take a look at that. There we go. Registration information, ASQC, again, stands for?
Automotive. ASQC?
Yes.
Is the American Society for Quality Control.
Okay. And then there's AIAG?
AIAG is the Automotive Industry Action Group.
Very good. We'll show you these numbers at the end of the program today. We just wanted to make sure you had them. That having been said, what we'd like to do now is open up our discussion here in our panel in Kalamazoo. So we'll have an opportunity to talk about all of the questions that you have been able to fax to us so far, and we'll also open up the telephone lines. Joining Russ and I here in the studio are Dan Reed from General Motors and Steve Walsh from Ford. Thank you all for your very good presentations. We've had a little rivalry here about who was more interesting, and that's a good thing, I think. Let's begin with some of these fax questions. Some of them start out right at the beginning, and they say, for example, this one comes from Grand Rapids, Michigan. Is QS-9000 recognized by those who require ISO 9000 certification? The answer is?
Yes. As was mentioned earlier, Mike, a certificate for QS-9000 also has an ISO 9001 or 9002 stamp on it. So obviously, if a supplier has satisfied the requirements of QS-9000, they have also satisfied the requirements of ISO 9001 or 9002.
Here's another question. This one comes as well from, let's see, this one's from Cleveland. It relates to the relationship between QS and ISO. QS-9000 requirements are more difficult than ISO standards, yet the evaluation process of suppliers allow for zero tolerance in the pass-fail method. Are there any plans to change the zero tolerance? Dan, is that yours?
I think we can address that.
Okay.
The QS-9000 requirements really are more prescriptive or descriptive of the ISO requirements, and they're not different. If you answer the QS-9000, you get the ISO. The zero tolerance, basically, we did not want to grant certifications where there's a open nonconformity. Now, a lot of these nonconformities that turn up in these audits are issues that can be a lot of times cleared up with documentation, additional things put into place to document what is being done, it is compliant, or some changes to some corrective action processes and can be verified in a short order. So we really don't see that extending the registration time frame to get registered much by having time to close those out prior to the issuing of the certificate. We'd rather do that and err on that side rather than having non-conforming systems out there with certifications on file.
If I could add to that, to clarify, very much QS-9000 is the automotive spin on ISO, which we all recognize. But what hasn't been mentioned is the fact that our suppliers have been doing those practices and policies and procedures for quite some time now. If you're a Ford supplier and Q1 in good standing, then you're not doing anything really in addition to that in order to be in compliance with QS-9000. The issue comes from a procedural or administrative standpoint that the supplier probably doesn't have a quality policy or a manual or a set of procedures in place that actually mirror what is happening on his shop floor. And that's where his system falls apart.
Question from Cleveland. Are IASG-sanctioned QS-9000 interpretations going to continue indefinitely? Will they become part of the next revision of QS-9000? What is the document control process that will ensure all users of QS-9000 will have the latest sanctioned interpretations? Is that a Steve or is that a Russ?
Let's make it a Russ.
Okay.
We would expect for the time being to continue IASG, Mike. As long as there's a demonstrated need, we will attempt to fill that need. Certainly, as we come across questions that would impact the understanding of QS-9000 to the extent that we were moved to make changes in subsequent editions of QS-9000, we will certainly undertake to do that. In some cases, there will be interpretive questions regardless of the language and content of the standard, and of course we would reserve right to make decisions with respect to that content.
Here's a question that I think would be directed at Steve. ISO 9000 allows a supplier to be certified to 9002 rather than 9001. Will QS 9000 allow different levels of certification?
I think if I understand the question correctly, I covered that in my presentation.
And
the standpoint that if the supplier has design responsibility as identified and acknowledged by the customer, then he must be ISO 9001, which means that all his engineering activities are audited and have successfully passed QS 9000.
Putting the phone number up on the screen for you. We'd love to hear from you. We'll take your question live by telephone. And in the meantime, we're going to move through just this mass of fax questions. Many of them, of course, will relate to one another, and the whole idea here is to make sure that your questions are answered. So give us a call, 1-800-318-5751. Question, I can't tell where this one came from. What ramifications does QS-9000 have for tooling suppliers? Is that the design question again?
Well, it isn't really.
Okay.
Tooling suppliers should not really try to utilize QS-9000. There isn't a whole lot of difference between what they are doing in QS-9000, but it could be a source of unintended confusion. So what we have done is put a work group together to actually develop a tooling and equipment supplement that will be used in conjunction with QS-9000 as the core quality system requirement. In the meantime, suppliers should look at ISO 9002, I would suggest, to get a head start on TE 9000. And by the way, we're changing the name of that, which might be a source of confusion or frustration, because we don't want it to become, confused with ISO 9000 or QS 9000, because it won't be a standalone auditable document. We will now call it Tooling and Equipment Supplement, or TE.
We have a telephone call from Michigan, probably just down the street no, I don't know that's for sure. Hello, who do we have on the line? Tell us what your question is.
I would like to what role does for QS play
I'll tell you what, we're having a little trouble with our phone level technology, so we're going to put you on hold while we fix that, and I think we'll get back to our questions here if that's all right. What about service providers, painting, cleaning, engineering, architectural services? Where do they fit into the QS-9000 situation?
Well, as we've mentioned earlier, Mike, QS-9000 is for first-tier suppliers of basically production and service parts, with a few, as Steve referred to, exceptions. So therefore, service providers in the areas that were mentioned in the question are not specifically directed or addressed in QS-9000. There are some considerations longer term to provide additional guidance to those suppliers, but the ISO series of quality systems provides an opportunity for those suppliers, if they so desire, to get started on a quality system, and that's what we would recommend at this time.
All right, let's gird up our courage and try the phones once again. We have a different caller this time. Michigan, I apologize. Let's move on to South Carolina. Welcome.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning to you.
This is Mark Pease from Greenville, South Carolina.
Hello, Mark.
I've got actually two questions. One is directed to Mr. Walsh, and I'm trying to define how MS-9000 ties into the QS-9000. Should it be handled separately? Is it a joint issue? What is Ford's, I guess, intent?
Okay. Mark, let me ask you to give you your second question while you're here with us.
Okay. The second question, I'm sorry about that. Second question has to deal with the subjectivity of interpretation. We've had outside assessors come into our operation and give us completely different views on the same point.
All right.
How do we clear up the subjectivity of QS-9000?
All right, let's deal with the first one first. MS-9000 versus QS-9000.
MS-9000 is Ford's material or delivery system requirements that were recently developed and shared with suppliers, such as the collar. From a content standpoint, the supplier should look at 415 delivery to be sure that he has a system in place to ensure 100% on-time delivery and so on. MS-9000 is in addition to that and separate from QS-9000 and is a requirement if that supplier wishes to maintain his Q1 status or attain Q1 status in the future if he's a new supplier or recertify to Q1. And it is included in the Q1 award policy manual that was recently developed and shared with suppliers. If that material has not been received by the caller, I'd suggest that he call EdCore Data Systems in Farmington Hills, Michigan. Unfortunately, I'll try to give you the number, and hopefully it'll be a good number. It's area code 810-626-2011, but again, their name is EdCore Data Services, and they can provide you with that Q1 award policy manual.
Steve, the best solution if that number is wrong is for us to just take your home phone number and people can call you at home about 2 o'clock in the morning.
Thank you, Mark.
I'd like to ask Mark to let us take some liberty here, and I'd like to defer with the promise that we will bring it back in the second question and answer period at the end of the program today, his question on the subjectivity interpretation, because we will have with us a person who does these interpretations and evaluations for a living, and perhaps we would defer to his answer on that question. I'd like to move to another one of the questions. Steve, this is yours again, and that's how does your Q101 fit into these requirements? This vendor is currently pursuing Q1.
Okay. I don't know if I sensed some confusion in the question, but just let me clarify what I think I heard. Q101 no longer exists. It was replaced in total by QS-9000. So the fundamental quality operating system requirements that the supplier must ensure that he meets is now QS-9000. The supplier must successfully be in compliance to QS-9000. So that's one key part of attaining or maintaining his Q1 status, but it is not limited to just QS. As I mentioned earlier, it also has MS-9000 in it, as well as launch performance and PPMs, QRs, things like that that are relevant, actual, real-time quality indicators that complement and add to QS-9000.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. I'm afraid we have to stop right now. We've promised everyone a break, and that's what's going to happen. When we return, we will have an actual video case study of some length, some duration, of a company that's been able to work through the QS-9000 process and has achieved documentation. For now, we will take that 20-minute break, and when we return, we'll see and hear the strategies and steps that Michigan-based automotive supplier used in implementing QS-9000. Enjoy the break. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes. Welcome back to our satellite seminar, QS-9000, the new automotive supplier quality standard. We are delighted you could join us today, and we'd like to thank all of you who are viewing from across all four of our time zones. In addition to so many of you who have been with us virtually every month, we also have some new viewing locations. So, welcome to the Georgia Statewide Network, which comprises a dozen locations sponsored by the Georgia Manufacturing Extension Center. And hello as well to Minnesota Technology Incorporated, which is located in Minneapolis. They're using some of the newest digital equipment at their downlink site. Well, let's get back to the program. In the second part of our activities today, we will be focusing on the implementation issues of QS-9000. And we will begin by taking a look at the experience of Prince Corporation in implementing QS-9000. Prince is an automotive supplier in Holland, Michigan. They developed a quality system to fit their manufacturing culture, as well as successfully incorporating the QS-9000 requirements. Let's watch.
Prince has been in business since 1965. At that time, they started manufacturing die-cast machines. In 1972, Prince developed a lighted sun visor, and from that point on, we were in the automotive business. We currently are producers of interior trim products, ranging anywhere from door trim panels to floor consoles to overhead systems and any other assorted interior trim parts. Prince started with an official quality initiative in the early 80s, and I think it was 1982 that we received Ford Q1 award. And that began probably by starting a quality manual and setting up some systems in our various plants at that time. So if you are supplying product to anyone, you have to be aware of the customer's expectations. And in order to disseminate that customer expectation to your employees, you got to have a set of requirements that the employees can all understand. That becomes the driver for your quality system. Okay, it's just a set of it's a way of your employees understanding what the customer expects and then delivering consistent performance to those expectations. Prince began to look for a good system, a good quality system that they could deploy throughout the entire company. We've always had high-quality products. However, we have a number of different sites located primarily in Holland that all ran their operation somewhat differently. And so we started looking around to try to eliminate variation between our different plants. And we came upon ISO as a marvelous set of quality requirements
that once developed could apply to any job site, any plant site. So we started really not after an ISO certification or a QS-9000 certification. We started after a common quality system that would be applicable to all of our job sites. I believe as we tried to come up with a common quality system, some of the drivers that got us to that point were we were faced with significant growth. We were adding additional manufacturing operations. We have one in Mexico. We have a sequencing facility in Detroit. We were having a lot of growth not only in Holland but outside of Holland. We were faced with products we had never manufactured before, such as door trim panels and our electronics universal garage door opener. These brought along with them a lot of new manufacturing processes, and we could see that these things were causing our quality improvement to slow down. So, in addition to this, at the same time all these things were happening, our customer was really tightening up their quality expectation and requirements. Chrysler came out with their plant in Pennistar. Several of our customers, Ford and General Motors, said, we want you to be shooting or aiming for 60 parts per million. There was the commonization effort in their quality system that we were aware of because we were a portion or were on the AIAG committee. Some of the customers were asking for process sign-offs. Some of the customers were asking for run-it rates. There was a rationalization of suppliers, so those suppliers that were going to stay in business had to get better faster. And all of them said quality is that's the ticket to the dance. You got to have it or you don't even get in. And so that was probably some of the impetus behind why we said we got to get better and we got to get better fast. So we started looking around for a quality system. And we looked at Malcolm Baldrige. We looked at a lot of TQM methodologies. We looked at, there's all kinds of stuff out there. There's aerospace, there's mill standards, there's ISO. We happen to like ISO because it didn't tell us. We're a very entrepreneurial company, and it didn't tell us how to do it. It told us what elements were essential to have in a good quality system. So we began to try to take those 20 elements that were in ISO and build our system around those requirements. At the same time, we were aware of what our customer expectations were. So as we built our systems around ISO, we were naturally taking the customer's requirements, which, by the way, happened to be what ended up in QS. So we were building into our ISO system those QS requirements without even knowing them at the time. And so when we got done and we got ready to have our audits done, we were actually audited not to ISO, but to QS-9000, even before QS-9000 was officially published.
Well, as Lowell talked about, in approximately March of '93, we had talked about why do we want to do our quality system, and we had looked around and chose ISO 9001 as the basis of the guideline for our quality system. Well, starting at about that time, what we decided to do was to go out and learn a little bit more about ISO 9001 and talk to some other companies that had implemented it. So that's what we did. And as we did a little bit of benchmarking and a little bit of studying, we came up with some key decisions and strategies that we used through our certification process. One of the things that we said that we were most interested in is the quality system to help us produce better products and also provide better services. The certification to that quality system, whether it's QS-9000 or ISO 9001, was really going to be a confirmation that we had done the basics correctly. But the real reason for going after it was to produce better quality products and services. The second thing that we decided to do during this whole thing was to only write policies and procedures that met the ISO 9001 requirements. We had seen other approaches from other companies where they basically documented everything that they did, put them into manuals and procedures, and then they said that later on they would re-engineer and recombine and redo things. And we looked at that and said that that was a valid strategy, and some companies have had a lot of success with it, but we chose to do it a little bit differently. We said we wanted to have procedures for only the requirements for ISO and QS-9000. We can always add procedures later as we find out that they add value, but we wanted to start off small. So that was one of our strategies. Our procedures had to be simple, easy to use, well thought out. Our systems have to serve people. We didn't want people to serve the procedures, and it comes back again to why we wanted to do it. We wanted to produce better quality products and services. The other key decision and strategy that we used had to do with our internal auditing process. QS-9000 requires that you have an internal auditing program, and we chose not to have a full-time auditor or a full-time auditing department. What we wanted to do instead was to spread the effort to different areas. And so what we have today are approximately 35 lead auditors that we've trained. These are people that have been through a Prince 3-day class that we teach, and they've also participated on an audit team with another lead auditor. And they need to have at least 2 different audits to be certified. Those people are in all different departments of Prince. We have some people in finance, we have some people in engineering, some in manufacturing and other areas. And what that does for us is that gives us different teachers and trainers all throughout the company that can help people in their individual departments better understand procedures and better understand how to use them. And they're also good coaches when they go in and participate with other people. One of the other things that is important is you need to have senior management buy-in as you go through this particular process. The leader of your organization has to believe that redoing your quality system is going to gain you some benefits in addition to the customer requirement. And as I talk about the process that we went through step by step to get certification and get our system up to date, you'll see where that senior management buy-in comes in. The way we organized our system is we have a quality policy manual, which has 23 sections to it. And then we also have 4 procedures manuals. One of the manuals is a manufacturing operating system manual. Those are the procedures that our manufacturing group has to follow on the floor. It would include things like how do we do incoming inspection, how do we handle non-conforming material, how do we do operator instructions. We have another manual which deals with purchasing. How do we deal with our suppliers? How do we select suppliers, rate them? How do we communicate technical requirements to them? Another one is a manual that we call our product development process. This includes all 7 phases from the initial ideation of a product through the concept development and engineering all the way into production. And there's advanced quality planning tools that you can use during that time frame, like process flow charts, design and process FMEAs, control plans, and other things. Those are defined in our product development process manual. The last procedure manual that we have is what we call our corporate or common procedures manual. In there we talk about our internal auditing program, how we do training of all employees, how we do quality planning, our 8D problem-solving methodology, and some other things that go across the board. There's no magic in how you organize your manuals, but that organization seemed to work best for Prince, how we're organized and how we work. So that's why we ended up choosing that. Now, we started our whole process in approximately March of '93. And one of the first steps that we did was assigned a project leader to this whole process. And that person, by the name of Bill Stewart, spent a couple of months doing some reading, going to a seminar, talking to some different companies that had been through the ISO 9000 process before this, and just learning a little bit about what to expect and what are some of the expectations that we would have as we redesigned our system. And then we moved into what I'll call the second step, and that's where you're establishing the system organization. And this particular step for us lasted about 2 months, about 3 months, and we added a few more people in addition to the project manager. We had a couple of us from the corporate quality area that were involved, and we also had a few people from engineering and from our manufacturing area that were involved. And there what we're doing is we're establishing how we're going to organize our manuals, how we're going to lay out the procedures, the format of the procedures and what they were going to look like, how we were going to organize those on our computer system, how we were going to assign ownership for the various sections of these things, because this isn't a quality program. This is really a total company effort. And so you want to gain as much ownership as you possibly can from other areas besides quality in your organization. The other thing that we did is we put together a list of required procedures, or at least to the best of our knowledge at the time, what the required procedures were going to be for prints. And then we also started to think a little bit about how are we going to approve these procedures initially, and also how are we going to approve changes that would invariably come. And there's a lot of different approaches, but the approach that we chose to pick was one of quality councils. We have 5 different quality councils, one for each of the different procedure manuals and the policy manual that we have. For instance, the quality council for the manufacturing procedures are the operation managers from each of the plants, our vice president of manufacturing, and Lowell Jacobs, one of the people from our corporate quality area who's responsible for our quality systems. That's the group that has the authority to approve the changes and approve the procedures initially and to approve all changes. That's also the group that has the authority to allocate resources and to let people spend time on it and also spend money. And that's important as you set up whatever approach you use to approve changes. It should be the people that have the authority to spend money and assign resources. So that's what happened during step 2, which lasted about 2 to 3 months. Then we moved into what we'll call our next phase, or phase 3 of writing the policy and procedures. Now we've assigned a whole number of different people throughout the company to start to write some of these procedures. For instance, a gauge calibration procedure, we'd get some people that are involved with our quality labs to initially write that. And so you have to assign responsibility to that. You also need to set up some kind of a review process where you get a number of different people reviewing these. And what we did is we set up Friday afternoons as our time to review these procedures. We would get anywhere between 10 and 30 people in a conference room, and we would have a schedule laid out over a period of a couple of months where we knew exactly what procedure was going to be reviewed in any given week. And we'd spend 2 to 3 hours on a Friday afternoon and review a number of procedures. So that initial person or group of people that was assigned to write it initially had to present it to people that were going to end up using it. And they would get their input and feedback as to how good it was, whether there were some new ideas, and that caused that group that initially wrote it to go back and make the appropriate changes before we brought it to that official quality council of the operations managers or whoever it was to approve. And that particular process lasted probably about 3 or 4 months for us of the initial writing of the policy and procedures manuals. One of the other things that gets to be really important during this process is you want to start communicating to the rest of the organization that you're in what you're doing and what's coming up. You don't want people to be surprised as you start to get a little bit closer to implementing some of these different procedures and changing habits and changing the way you do things. And so you need to start a process of communicating that to people. And we did it through a whole number of different ways. Company newsletters, we have articles on what is ISO 9001 and why would somebody go after it, what is QS-9000. Our president goes through on a quarterly basis and updates the entire company, and so we use those opportunities for him to mention what they were. On Wednesdays, the operations managers each week update the plant on things that are happening. We use some of those to update people. Different staff meetings, things like that we call U-Talks. We use, so any of the communication avenues that you have available in your company, this is the time where you want to start rolling that out to people so that they aren't surprised when it comes time to implement this. They understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. Now you get to what we call the 4th step in our process, and that was the implementation phase. And this was by far the longest particular phase for us, and it was by far the most difficult phase. In this particular phase, this is where you start introducing individual procedures to your organization and asking them to start changing the way they do things to match this new procedure. We tried a number of different approaches in our manufacturing areas to implement this, and a couple of approaches didn't work very well. It ended up being the 3rd approach for us that worked the best, and that was a combination of a procedure of the week and also adopt the line. And here's how the procedure of the week went. On Thursday, we would have a group of trainers from each of our manufacturing plants, people that we call manufacturing systems engineers, would get together and they would spend some time understanding one or two procedures that we were going to be implementing the following week. On Monday of the following week, they would spend some time with the staff of each individual plant teaching them about that one or two procedures for that particular week. Then on Tuesday, right after break, they would stand up in front of the manufacturing plant and they would spend anywhere between 10 minutes and 40 minutes, depending on the procedures, and they would teach the entire plant, here are the new procedures that you need to understand. Now, from that point, you've got Tuesday afternoon, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday morning to start implementing those particular procedures. That's where Adopt-A-Line came in. We assigned people from the office staff to help each of the different work teams, whether they're work cells or assembly lines, to implement these procedures. What they did is they actually came up with some different certificates that had their picture on them, and they signed their name, and we called them adoption certificates, and we hung them up by each of the different work cells. And so they helped those teams implement these procedures on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday morning. Then around noon on Friday, the operations manager and some of the other people from the plant would make a tour through the plant and check each of the different work teams and find out how did they do in implementing that procedure. That support or help on Friday afternoon, and on Saturday, we'd provide some additional resources to get those implemented, because on Monday, we would start that whole process over again with another one or two procedures. Now, what we ended up doing with that particular approach is we went through every one of our manufacturing procedures over a period of a couple of months of some training, implementation, and some review. We finished that up, and we said that was great. We implemented a lot of these procedures on a lot of these lines, but this wasn't a habit yet, and we had brought some new people into Prince during that time frame, and so not everybody had heard all the procedures. So we decided, let's do that same thing again. So we went through a procedure of the week, only this time we went a little bit faster, where we had 2 to 3 procedures a week instead of 1 or 2. But the whole plan of training people, implementing the procedure, and also reviewing how did we do was really effective. Along the way, we tried to have an awful lot of fun. The adoption certificates were kind of fun. We also went through an awful lot of candy. We also went through some car wash certificates, pizza certificates, free salad bar lunches. We had a whole bunch of different games and techniques that we used to help make the learning and the implementation of this fun. In fact, we even had one team that came up with a game called ISO Jeopardy to see once how good people were at remembering what procedures were. And that was an awful lot of fun for a lot of people. So that's part of the technique of getting this thing implemented, is to have some fun along the way. This particular phase for us lasted from about the end of the summer of '93 until our official assessment in August of '94. So it was probably about 8 or 9 months long, the actual implementation of this. In August of '94 was when our official certification visit came, which we'll call Step 5, where our particular registrars, underwriters, laboratories came into Prince and did a review for 5 days and gave approval to ISO 9001, and also they reviewed us to QS-9000 and approved us at that time. Some of the results that Prince had from going through this process and redoing our quality system were really outstanding for us. From the time we started in about March of '93 to today, about 2.5 years, we have more than doubled the number of people that we've added in our operation. We've added new buildings and added on to our existing buildings. In fact, increased our manufacturing space by 25%. We've added brand new products that we've never had before. And we've added new manufacturing processes that we've had before. Those are all things that would tend to add variability to your organization, changes, and in spite of all of those, in this last 9 months, we have decreased our parts per million defective to our customer by 50% over what they were the year before. That's a pretty significant improvement in spite of all of the growth and all of the change that we've had in the last couple of years. Now, as soon as you're reducing your parts defective to your customer, you know you have a lot of other things going on. Your customers are a lot happier with your performance. You know your cost is going down because you'll make fewer unplanned trips to your customer's assembly plant. You'll be doing a lot less sorting and reworking. You'll have a lot less scrap. Your people are going to be able to focus more on the job at hand instead of doing unplanned things. And so there's a whole snowball effect that starts to happen with your whole cost structure. And that gives you time to make even further improvements. Now, just because we've put a system in place that meets QS-9000 certification doesn't by any means mean that we're shipping out perfect product every day, because I'm afraid we aren't. We still have a long ways to go and areas to improve on, but we understand the things that we want to do to our system to get us even better than where we're at before. So achieving QS-9000 certification was great. We had a huge celebration, had a lot of fun, but that's really just a step in the journey of continually improving our system and some of our quality techniques with the end goal in mind of just delighting our customer.
The thing that we did to organize training here at Prince was to adopt a line. We had some mentors and support people. We had manufacturing systems engineers, and their role was to organize training for every operator at Prince. And we literally trained everyone at Prince so that when we got all the systems in place, everyone understood why we were doing what we were doing. They weren't doing something that made no sense to them. We literally told them why they were doing it, and they were a part of even some of the input to develop our systems. So basically, they received training from their manufacturing systems engineer. We had a procedure every week that we trained them on. We've been through our procedures probably 3 times by now, but at the beginning it was going through each procedure and telling each person what we wanted for them to do, what was required of them, and then explaining why that was. Sometimes it was difficult for people who had been at Prince for a number of years to understand why we needed to go to a certain or set way of doing things. What they had been doing in their mind worked for many, many years, and it did in fact work, but there were some things that were important and we needed to do things a certain way. So probably just getting the change implemented, getting people to accept that change. Just the sheer number of people that we had to train was not necessarily an obstacle, but a challenge. Lots of different kinds of people. Making sure that everyone understood the procedures or whatever the way that we intended for them to be understood. Those are all challenges when you go to implement change. The positive outcomes are just people grabbing hold of the system and coming up with even a better way to do it. My background came from manufacturing, so as I wrote some of the procedures I was responsible for, I used that to the best of my knowledge, but they even have a closer input because they're dealing with it every single day. So they took what we did and they just improved on it, and that continues to happen. It is so neat to see people come and say, this isn't working for us, so let's try this. And so we do it, and we've piloted some different changes, and sure enough, they work a lot better, and the people like them better, and they make more sense. So we save money, we get better buy-in, it all works out for the good.
I'm the manufacturing systems engineer here at Beechwood, and my responsibilities are training new procedures, auditing lines, and preparing for the UL audit. I train the teams on their specific procedures, operator instructions, finished part audit, SPC, job setup. They are responsible to follow these things, understand them. Usually what I'll do is train one person off the team per shift, and then they'll go and train the rest of their self, and they'll take that back, they'll implement it themselves, and I will check up with an audit, or sometimes we do scrambling, that type of thing, and other people audit their lines, checking to see how well we've implemented the new procedure. Since I began this role as MSE, I've seen several changes since I started. The team has taken great ownership. I think in the last 6 months, they've really began to understand the procedures, respect them. Actually, they understand what's made them better. They've been able to implement things It's really empowered the team, actually, because they're able to see things like trends on SPC charts. They had defects that they find in finished part audit. They're able to take action on it. It's really given them a sense of ownership to take care of things out here on the line and the floor, and we really need that from them. As a company, I think overall we've learned how to better contain and identify issues before they've reached the customer. Defects have decreased. We've done some tracking and we found that. I think when we first started, possibly we wrote our procedures and we worked to fit into them. Now they work around us, they're working for us. It's becoming a habit.
This team works on a line that produces an overhead doors and an explorer. I think one of the benefits is more consistency throughout the plant. Things just run a lot more smoother.
It also is much easier to go from one area to another because everything is done according to the manual and everybody has to follow the same guidelines.
And I feel that the documentation is better with this procedure. We all are required to document everything the same, and it helps us. And it just leads to an overall improvement in the business.
When we come to a new line or are trained on a different line, the first thing we're required to do is read the operator instructions on each station to see what to do and what the quality checks are. And there are also visual aids on most of the boards so that if we don't know what the part is, there's a picture there. With the new quality system and the new training that they do, people come into the line already knowing what the part is and they add to the line immediately, where we used to come and do one station for a week or more and not really know what we were building. Now we get people who immediately are part of our team.
I led a cross-functional team that put together our product development process. Our product development process are the key steps that we put in place to make sure that we design quality in right up front as opposed to try to inspect it in later in the process. The design control section of QS-9000 asks its suppliers define their product development process. Now that we've done that, we have a consistent way to design quality in right up front, which will have a big impact on quality on the manufacturing floor. Now that we have our product development process and other quality systems in place, we have a baseline that we can work from, which will continually improve the process, which will in turn continually improve the quality of our products.
We've been able to see a lot of changes within the facility based on putting in the ISO and the QS systems. Primarily, it's been able to identify a lot of areas that we need to work on. It's been able to show us where we need to develop additional systems. The results have been pretty fantastic. We've seen some areas that have seen a 10-to-1 decrease in rejects. And also, as we go along with so many new people that we've got in the organization, it's kind of a basis to start from. We can teach them the system. Everybody's on the same page. Everybody understands what's expected. And if they have questions, there's some place to go back to. There's a place to refer back to. And it's also been easy to, if we change our system, it's easy to alter. So it's something that stays current, continues to drive down the quality levels and keep everybody up to speed.
There are two reasons that a company can go after the installation of a quality system such as QS-9000. One of them, obviously, is because the customer said you got to do it. The other one is because you want to do it and you can get some really value out of it. If you choose the latter, you can't believe the amount of good that will come to your company if you do it right. Because what you build into your people is a constant re-engineering or rethinking of the process they use to do their job. Just the fact that you write a procedure, and if you can keep it as general as possible, you write a procedure which involves the way people do their job, they can then look at it and re-engineer it and revise it and improve their jobs and see it right there on a piece of paper. And, oh, by the way, you might get certified too. And that's really the reason that Prince went after it. We wanted a good, solid quality system in our company. We happen to think QS-9000 is a great system if it's followed and if you develop it around your culture.
Now live in the studio to share with us a few more insights into Prince's story is Jeff Pett, the Vice President of Corporate Quality. Welcome, Jeff. We're glad you could be here, and thanks so much for allowing our cameras to visit your shop and interview your employees. It looks really terrific.
You're very welcome.
If we were to ask you at this moment, what was the major hurdle you felt you had to overcome as you moved into the QS-9000 environment, what would that have been?
Well, there were many difficulties. I mean, it wasn't just an easy thing to do. We had to do quite a bit of planning. We had some setbacks, but probably along the way, the most difficult thing we faced was taking this small entrepreneurial company that was used to being highly decentralized, entrepreneurial, doing things the way a particular area wanted to do things within the guidelines, but as few procedures as possible, and then establishing a foundation of procedures that we said, these are best practices, we must do all of these things consistently. Well, taking that young entrepreneurial company or small entrepreneurial company through that procedure was a little bit difficult.
At the end, the presenter talked about fitting the QS-9000 environment into the culture, or maybe it's the other.
Sure.
That doesn't seem easy to me.
Well, and in fact, while we've got a culture that will work well with this, again, the cultural change for us was going from this entrepreneurial company and putting the right number of the right procedures in place. We don't want to lose the entrepreneurial spirit, but it has to be transferred up to above and beyond those foundational principles. And getting people to sign up and say, yes, these things we must do the same, was the cultural change for us.
I would think young employees would have a different outlook than older employees. I don't mean age-wise, I mean in terms of tenure. Probably some training issues, too.
Sure. Employees, interestingly enough, the new employees to the company, you hand them the book and say, this is how we do it, they love it. They sign up right away to it, and no problem, I'll do it that way. The 15-year employee who's been with us since we were 500 people and has grown with us along the way knows how it always has been done and likes to do it that way. And it took a little bit more time for them to adjust.
What would you say QS-9000 and the implementation of QS-9000 has done to the way you run your business, including your strategic planning opportunities?
Well, QS-9000 really has been instrumental for us in the past year. We were certified last fall to ISO 9000, and then January, as soon as it was available, we were certified to QS-9000. We went through tremendous growth in the last year. Had we not had those baseline procedures in place while we were going through that growth, we don't think we could have survived as well as we did. In fact, not only going through all that change and growth and disruption that causes, it allowed us to actually improve. Our PPM is way down from where it was a year ago.
Very good, Jeff. Thanks so much for these additional insights. Please stay right there because we're going to get into the question and answer period, and I'm sure that many of the issues that come to the table you'll have an opinion on. We want to hear it.
Very good.
As we move forward, let's take a moment now to pose our final question to our panel of senior executives from the Big Three. The question this time is, what are the implications of QS-9000 for the second tier of suppliers?
Focus and rollout of this will be our first-tier suppliers. But we expect our first-tier suppliers, the ones that we do direct business with, to then cascade it and roll it to their second and third-tier supply base. Actually, the second and third-tier supply base is very common between Chrysler, Ford, and General Motors, and so we expect to get extra leverage as each of the Big Three begin to use the booklet at their supply base.
Well, part of the requirements of this process are certainly to our second-tier and third-tier supplier. From my own personal experiences, I can tell you that when we do root cause analysis on many of the problems that occur from suppliers, it's generally not being found as a result of a problem in the first-tier supplier, but the problems are normally a generation of a problem where something in the supply process is going wrong from a second-tier or third-tier supplier. So it's most important that our Tier 1 suppliers drive this process through their total value added chain.
Why don't we take just a few moments to remind you that we will have a fairly lengthy question and answer session coming up. Here are the numbers for you. But for now, let's take a few more minutes for discussion among our studio participants. I'd like to reintroduce everyone who's here. You've had a chance to meet Dan Reed and Steve Walsh and Jeff Pett, and of course Russ is here as well. And I also like to introduce for the first time Greg Swan. Greg is president of a company known as Bureau Veritas Quality International, and that means that you are a registrar. Tell us what kind of relationships you build, who does what in that relationship. Let's get a quick handle on how this all fits together.
Mike, a registrar or certification body, as we're known in Europe, is a company who provides a service for its clients, like any company. It's important to understand that our clients are not Ford, Chrysler, GM, the government, the IRS, or anybody else besides that client. We have a very special relationship with that client to provide a service. That service is to provide an assessment of the operation of any company against a standard, and in this case we're talking about the QS-9000 standard. And when we are satisfied, when the assessment team is satisfied that the client is compliant with the standard, then we issue a certificate. And that's what we do.
And that process could take how long?
It can take typically anywhere from 3 months to a year to complete the process from the time we do the initial assessment.
Earlier in the program, Mark from South Carolina called in with a question that basically said, how can you make certain that one registrar will look at the same set of facts the same way as another registrar? What consistency can we create here in your business?
It's a good question. As a matter of fact, if there's one outstanding complaint against the registration process itself, it's inconsistency of the assessors themselves. And the best response to that question is to advise our audience that they should first be looking to accredited registrars or certification bodies. Secondly, if we're talking about QS-9000, they must be QS-9000 qualified accredited registrars. This means that there are certain procedures in place within the registration body which control the training, the qualification, and the actual practice of the assessors, and gives us the best chance to be consistent on the job. Unfortunately, we haven't found a way to do these assessments without using human beings, and humans are, by their very nature, variable in their approach. This can lead to perceptions of inconsistency, but the accredited registrar must have a process in place to train, qualify, and keep consistent to the best of their ability those services provided to its clients.
A follow-up question. What evidence do you submit to a client that proves that you are so certified?
The evidence comes from the accreditation process
itself. There's a stamp or something? There are words that...
Certainly, the accreditation body provides us a certificate after they have conducted their assessment of us as a registrar to assure that we meet the international requirements of a registrar or certification body.
And what about the subjectivity of the information? Is there, this leads me to say, is there an appeals process or a process for reinvestigating or re-examining a company or a vendor?
Any accredited registrar is obligated to have within its own quality system an appeals procedure which allows any client or potential client to raise its issues to a higher authority if not satisfied with the service of that registrar.
We've gotten a couple of... I'd like to thank you very much, Greg. I'd like to open up. Let's talk for a couple of minutes, and we're going to go to the phones. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I got a comment on that as well. The IASG that Steve mentioned earlier, the International Auto Sector Group, that was the reason it was convened, was to basically provide common sanctioned interpretations for those auditors to use. Literally what happened to us in the early rollout of QS-9000 is that we'd get calls from auditors on the floor at some plant doing it out saying, this is what I see, is it okay or not? And we said, gee, we need to do something about this, and let's put some sanctioned interpretations out there for everyone to use. And it's the same kind of initiative we did with the Code of Practice to try to reduce variation in the third-party process. So we've done some things we think proactively to try to address that as well.
Here's an interesting question. It's almost procedural, but it has to do with the sort of the administration of QS-9000. This person faxed in a management review. What about management review of the quality system? Is it adequate? For example, they say they have annual review of the quality manual, and they have weekly staff meetings, and quality issues are reviewed. Is that enough to maintain QS-9000 certification?
I think, based upon the words on that fax, we would say that's not enough. If we read the words of QS-9000, we see that the management review process, as Steve alluded to in his presentation, must be comprehensive, meaning we're looking to see that management has established objectives for quality. And the management review session should be looking to see whether or not these objectives are being attained, what are the trends, We're looking for input from various sources, from customer complaints, the analysis of those complaints. And yes, we're interested to see that the system continues to operate as planned, and that's where the internal audit and review of the procedures comes in. Management review is intended to be management's look at the system from many different directions with many different objective pieces of information to see that it continues to work well.
What is the general cost we should anticipate for a company that starts traveling down the QS-9000 road?
General cost, I'd like to talk about the value of quality system registration before we talk about the cost. What we're finding with our clients is that typically there is not a good system in place to actually measure the value of quality system registration, but we believe, like any good investment, quality system registration should lead to a good payback. And that payback will come in the reduction of scrap and rework, more satisfied clients, larger market share, etc., if measured. Talking about the cost, there's two kinds of cost. There's an internal cost, and we've heard from Prince about the cost of putting a system in and getting it registered. And the external cost is also a factor, but the internal cost is typically the larger of the two costs. From the registrar's point of view, registration is going to cost at least $5,000 and varies depending on the size, the physical structure, the complexity of the parts and the processes from that point. But I would say that $5,000 for the initial registration is a good planning point for the smallest of companies.
And I was going to say,
sure.
probably what we'd add on top of that is the supplemental training costs that go into play. So okay. You're still going to have your regular training programs going on, but here you are coming in trying to introduce something that's totally new to the organization, at least in terms of those specific procedures, and in the process of training everybody and trying to make that a habit, you certainly incur some costs. So again, very difficult to capture.
Is there a range, though? And I would assume the cost per company would vary by employee. I mean, training is one attribute that's sort of capitized. Is there any kind of a number you can give us per person, per employee, per...
Let me try that. If we take a typical company of, okay, let's call it a typical small to medium-sized company of 200 people, a 200-person company with one site seeking 9002 registration is likely to cost $12,000 to $15,000 for the initial registration, and then a further $15,000 to $18,000 for the maintenance of that certificate over the typical 3-year period of its registration.
Okay, thank you. I think the number is out there, and people can evaluate what the value might be. What is the value?
Oh, the value is tremendous. Again, how do you have your organization run as smoothly as possible? How do you, you referred to eliminating scrap and rework and reducing defects to the customer and customer satisfaction. All those things fall on the value side of the equation. Again, very difficult to quantify. You saw on the tape, we've seen a 50% reduction in defects out the door. All by itself shows the value.
There's some value in that. This person writes, we are a small company of about 70 employees. Every year we show improvement in desired areas, including scrap and waste reduction, productivity improvements, customer complaints, and so on. And we've met every price reduction challenge set by the big 3 customers that they have. I think implicit in the question is, how can we possibly justify the cost that we're talking about, or anything like it, to achieve a certification? What's your take on that?
We saw a survey that was dated, I think, September of '93. About 650 companies had responded to that, and on the average of 650 companies, which is a pretty good sample size,
yes,
they reported about $179,000 annual savings. That was the average of all 650, saying that that's what they had been able to achieve in savings as a result of the blind spots being addressed in their system. I mean, you can perform well with a marginal system if you maintain rigorous attention to it. But if the system is not capable, as capable as a QS-9000 compliance system, you could have a spill tomorrow, despite what your performance has been in the back. It costs 1 recall. Look at the cost of 1 recall.
Sure. And this sounds like a company that's pretty well run, and perhaps implementing QS-9000, they're so close to it, it's not going to cost them anywhere near the figure. You're giving an average number
for a 200
for a company that sounds like it's pretty well run. It may just be a matter of tidying up some procedures.
We will open for questions and answers from the field in just one moment, but this fax has come in. It's germane. I'd like to move forward with it. Same kind of situation. A small vendor, 30 people, been doing business to a first-tier supplier, so this is a second-tier person. For 10 years. No rejects, they say, no return material, 90% on time delivered, 98% on time delivery. All done, excellent people skills. Why do they need this certification? The nut question here is, what about the second tier and the third tier? Where do they fit into this? And the answer is, do they fit?
Well, under 462 in the standard, we talk about subcontractor development, and we expect the suppliers to deploy the standard into at least a tier 2 level with their suppliers or our subcontractors. And that gets you to tier 2, but beyond that, we don't really have a mechanism. We would encourage suppliers to deploy it fully, but we really lack a mechanism to do that.
A fax question has come in regarding the relationship between first tier, second tier, third tier. The nut of the question is that demands can be placed by the first tier on the second and the second on the third. And how far can that go, and what controls can one place on it so that one is not, in their view, driven out of business by these compliance issues? How do you handle that if you're down there in the second and third tier?
Mike, that was one of the reasons that we originally developed QS-9000 with the thought in mind that it would not only be applicable to the first-tier suppliers, but it would reduce the proliferation of quality system requirements throughout the entire supply chain, because we have specifically directed our first-tier suppliers to assess the requirements of QS-9000 throughout the supply chain as appropriate. In some cases, that might mean a full implementation of all QS-9000 requirements, but many times only a portion of QS-9000 that's specifically applicable. So in each case, it requires a very careful study and some dialogue to go on between the first-tier supplier and the second or third-tier supplier in question. And we would encourage that dialogue on an ongoing basis, and we don't feel that it's appropriate at this time to dictate a set of requirements throughout the supply chain that may in fact drive additional cost without value added to be gained as a result of the implementation.
So if I were at the second and third tier, you're offering me encouraging news. Is this correct?
We think we are, yes.
Okay, very good. What do you say we take some calls and see if we can answer some more questions? You have been absolutely exemplary in sending us faxes. We must have 60 faxes here, gentlemen. So I think what we need to do is keep our answers tight, and let's move ahead and try to touch everything. Some of the material we'll repeat a little bit. We'll just make sure we cover all the questions you've sent in. The first caller from Illinois, welcome to the program. What can we do for you?
Good morning, gentlemen. My name is Phil Davis from Chicago.
Speak up if you would, just a little bit louder.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Good morning. I have two questions. The first one is, I have received 2 sets of your 7 packs. However, I have not come across any type of hands-on manual dealing with record retention. Where can suppliers look to or go to get that type of information regarding hard tooling, setup parts, CPAP parts, and in general documentation records?
Okay. And your second question?
The second question is directed to Mr. Walsh, and it's just general. Why has Ford Motor Company adopted a decision not to mandate the QS-9000 requirement date? And just what are the feelings behind that company corporate decision?
That question has come up a good deal in the faxes. We'll try to address it for you. Thank you very much for your question. Let's see if we can get some answers for you. First, what's the issue on the answer on documentation? Help me with this. Who wants this? Go ahead.
Well, okay.
Where can they get information so they know what to document, what not to document, what to maybe waste time with,
yes,
and what to throw away?
And retention. I heard the word retention.
Yes.
The QS-9000 document is probably the best source of information about what must be recorded and saved as a quality record. There is also information within the QS-9000 Quality System Requirements Manual that talks about specific retention periods for certain documents. Beyond that, retention period should be determined by the supplier for what makes good business sense for that supplier. Those records have value up to a certain age depending on what they're actually trying to record. And again, a quality record is a record which is demonstrating the compliance of the system or the compliance of the product with its requirements.
Best source in the meantime, the QS-9000 document.
Best source.
All right, next caller. Thank you very much. What about, Steve, what about this Ford Motor Company thing? You don't require certification now. Are you going to?
We have no plans at this time, Mike, to require suppliers to obtain third-party registration, and that's based on the fact that we wanted to be sure that the product was successfully implemented, rolled out, deployed, understood by the suppliers out there. There's a lot of questions and a lot of concerns, one of which surrounding that is the fact that we wanted to be sure that there were adequate audit capability to meet the market demand, and that the results of the audit would be consistent and credible to us as a customer. In order to make that kind of an informed decision, we need some facts, and at this point, it's just too early to make that decision.
We have faxes from vendors who serve, or suppliers who serve all three of the big three, and they feel, in these faxes, there are about 3 of them in here, they feel that it seems silly that they have no requirement for certification for you and different standards or certification requirements from the other two. To help me understand why that's okay for now. Did I misstate the situation? That's what the question is.
What you need to understand, and as suppliers even more so, is the fact that Ford has instructed their our suppliers to be compliant, fully compliant with QS-9000 effective June of 1995. And that means they undertake a self-assessment and so on and so forth, as I discussed earlier. We feel that suppliers that are Q1 in good standing will only have to go through minimal effort in what they're doing fundamentally in their quality operating system. However, procedurally, administratively, they're probably going to have to now restructure their quality policy and their manual to be in sync with the flow of the elements in QS-9000.
The one step they don't have to take for Ford is certification.
That's right.
But the fact of life is that if they serve all three, they will have 3 different outlooks they have to adopt. Is this correct for now?
Yes, Mike, that's correct.
Okay.
Well, actually, if they serve all 3, you take the nearest one, and that's when you've got to meet.
That's right. That's
and
right.
that's really what it comes down to for most of us.
That's right. That's right.
And is that truly a burden or not?
Wrong person to ask. We've already got
You've done it.
I think it would be unfair to the rest of the supply base. I think a lot of people are feeling under the gun, and that's a lot of pressure with that timeline.
I understand. Very good. Let's move on to another caller. Thank you so much, Illinois. Let's move on to Michigan. Welcome to the program. What can we do for you?
Hi, Mike. This is Dee Ortiz. I have 2 short questions.
Ready?
The first one is for GM. There's a prototype shop that makes 5 to 50 pieces at a time. How is process failure mode and effects implemented? My second question, what is the status of TS-9000?
Of TE.
TS-9000.
F. Frank, C. S. Sam. I can't understand.
You're talking about tooling and equipment or facilities?
3rd tier, 2nd and 3rd tier. TS?
There is nothing like that.
The status of that is it doesn't exist.
Okay, that was a question that was posed to me. So,
okay, understood. If the question was TE, I think we've touched it. We'll hit it again for you. Thank you so much for your call. Let's get some answers. GM, what's the deal on...
FEMAs, yeah, she asked about FEMAs are for prototype for 5 to 50 pieces.
Right.
The FEMA really, you do a process FEMA on the process regardless of what the volume is. I mean, there's a process involved in manufacturing prototype parts just like there's production parts. And I think that you could look at it from the standpoint of what could possibly go wrong in the manufacture of these parts and do some risk priority numbers and do some prevention types of things to mistake-proof that process just as the same as you could with the high-volume parts. Prototype, though, again, that's something you need to look at the applicability up on page, I think it is 2, in the revised QS-9000 to see if it's not production or service parts or materials or one of the finishing services, prototype supplier pure and simple may not be an issue. So.
Very good. I hope that answered your question. Thank you so much. Question by fax. If a company has ISO approval, I assume that's ISO 9000, not approval by a registrar, not currently approved for QS-9000, will they be required to go through the process again for QS-9000? Answer is?
The answer is.
Yes.
That company will need to go through an evaluation to the additional requirements by a registrar who is qualified as a QS-9000
and if the registrar is not qualified, what to do?
What to do? The first thing to do, in fairness to that registrar, is to talk to the registrar about its plans. If it has no plans to become QS-9000 qualified, then that supplier needs to be looking for a qualified QS-9000 registrar to continue its registration.
Could their ISO registrar be a source of information on locating QS-9000 registrars?
I'm sure. Okay. The best source is the accreditation body, however. The RAB, in this country, the RVC, are the 2 that have qualified registrars to date.
Okay, let's move on to the telephones once again from Texas. Welcome to the program.
Hi, thank you. I guess I got a quick question for any one of the members from the Big 3.
Good.
Obviously, the QS-9000 has a lot of benefits, and you can see significant quality improvements, efficiency improvements, etc. Excuse me. And my question is, are there any of the big three planning on implementing aspects of QS-9000 in their own facilities? And if not, why not?
Well, that's a very good question, and yes, absolutely. We have, each of us, if I can speak for my colleagues, implemented QS-9000 requirements with our internal operations. At this point, in the case of Ford, our first step to that is to achieve ISO certification of our Ford Automotive operations by December 31, 1996. Then the next step will be to upgrade that, I'll call it, to QS-9000 registration. Perhaps Russ or Dan would like to add what they're doing internally.
At Chrysler, our chairman, Robert Eaton, declared in a senior management meeting just last month that Chrysler would be pursuing third-party registration to QS-9000 in all of its manufacturing operations. And to that end, we have already entered into initial contractual relationship with a third-party registrar.
Very good. Dan?
Yeah, many of our manufacturing operations are doing the same thing, the Delphi Group, where they're suppliers to Chrysler, Ford, some other customers subscribing to QS-9000 at various stages of implementation. Some are doing a two-step process to go with ISO first and an upgrade. Others are going straight for QS-9000. So we're doing the same thing.
Gentlemen, thank you. To the big three, I assume. How will the big three supplement suppliers' efforts to attain QS-9000? That is, will on-site assistance be available as it was in the case of Q101, Pentastar, and Targets? Simple answer is?
Yes.
Yes.
To some degree, yes, but not to the same level or depth of assistance that we've done in the past. We expect that, the supplier community to obtain that assistance as they need to from their own internal means through training, through consultation with outside parties and experts.
Thank you very much. From Dayton, Ohio, a fax. Does QS-9000 require suppliers to provide technical documentation for servicing their component system? Does that make sense? And if so, what level of documentation might be required? The answer is?
If I understand the question, servicing is a part of the QS-9000 requirement, and if servicing is a contractual requirement with the customer, yes, servicing must be covered within the quality system.
All right, very good. How much impact will advanced quality systems have in lowering the cost and price of the car to the consumer? That's an interesting question, actually. What's the market impact going to be? Theoretically, it should go down, or could go. Our profits could go up. Take your pick.
I wish there was an easy, simple, straightforward answer to that question. It's a very interesting question. Unfortunately, the reality of the situation is that we're compelled by marketplace, competitive, as well as governmental, federal regulations, both in safety and emissions, to add additional equipment to every model year change that comes up. And that's in our business plans and strategy in the future. So whatever gains or savings we would see as a result of QS-9000 are more than offset by these product ads and feature ads and equipment ads that we are compelled to put in place.
Yeah, competition has a little to do with pricing, doesn't it?
Sure does.
Okay, question for all of you who implement. What process have you found to be the most effective communication approach implementing QS-9000 requirements to employees or with employees in large companies? How do you let the people know and get them to do it? Training's one. What else?
Well, probably for us, again, it came down to dividing and conquering. Get down to smaller groups, appoint people who, and train them to train. So it's train the trainer kind of a program.
Mm-hmm.
And we went to a weekly program where we had a procedure of the week and rolled that out across all of our operations, and then tested to that and just rolled right through, and then we did that whole thing a second time over, this all before we went through our registration audit.
Is that how you all who are moving in that direction in the big companies are looking at it? Divide it down into manageable pieces and move forward?
Yes, at Chrysler we've taken all of the elements, all 23 elements, and chunked them into pieces and assigned them to specific individuals and in specific organizations as most appropriate, because someone has to take the responsibility to develop the strategy and the implementation techniques element by element, if not sub-element by sub-element.
Very good.
We've got a number of coordinators that are working in it through teams, and basically having teams meet in different areas and meeting to discuss best methods, best practices, and to try to deploy those throughout all of the facilities, but to try to learn from each other as we go. So I think the teamwork has been a good method to communicate.
Excellent, thank you. Fax question. We're a supplier of non-production protective materials for production parts. For example, protective packaging for interim material handling. How do they fit? How do we fit into the QS-9000 system? How are they affected? Answer?
Like indirect suppliers.
Yeah, they don't fit directly, Mike.
Okay.
They're not considered a first-tier production part supplier in that sense. In some instances, they might very well be considered as a second-tier supplier to the, the first-tier production part supplier, and as such, need to understand how that first-tier supplier is planning on rolling out the QS-9000 requirements to the other parts of the supply chain.
It's conceivable they're a first-tier supplier as well to you, but since these aren't production parts?
Yeah, it really does not fall within the scope or applicability statement on page 2 of QS-9000.
Even though it's in their materials, their output may be involved in the production process as interim handling packaging. So, but for now, we think not.
As we look at it, as a supplier, they're supplying us with interim handling packaging or any kind of packaging material. We're going to look them as part of our supply base, and we expect good parts, and we expect that we're the customer. They can still go through the same question and answer process and move through the same kind of procedure, I would think.
Very good. From Fort Wayne, Indiana, should second or third level suppliers really go for QS-9000 certification, or is compliance good enough? Answer?
Well, the short answer from the OEM standpoint is that you are not required at this point in time to obtain third-party registration. If you're anything other than a direct production or service part raw material supplier to one of the three companies here, unless your first-tier, our first-tier supplier, your customer, requires you to obtain third-party registration as part of their strategy with you. That's the short answer.
There is value to having them do that. I mean, that's having a third party come in and look over your shoulder. As disciplined as we think we are, before QS-9000 came around, we decided we would go for ISO 9000 third party registration just because we felt we were growing enough, we needed to have that check and balance.
What would you recommend? This is a fax question from Erie, Pennsylvania. Would you recommend taking a two-step process, first reaching ISO 9000 and then progressing to QS-9000?
Yes.
Is that the right way to go?
I don't know if there's a good answer that's a one-size-fits-all kind of an answer. It's going to obviously, in some cases and situations, be a very good, solid approach to obtaining QS-9000 registration. In other cases, based on the company's infrastructure and organization and the products and so on and relationship with the customer, it might not be appropriate or even beneficial to do it in a two-step way.
Yeah, the issue I see there is that there's many ways to satisfy an ISO 9000 requirement. There's less ways probably to satisfy a QS 9000. If a company's got to go the whole distance, if they haven't got an ISO compliant system, I could see one scenario that says it might make more sense to go straight for QS. Because when you satisfy QS, you satisfy ISO. And if you satisfy ISO, you might not necessarily satisfy QS.
Understood.
So the only exception I would say to that is you can do the ISO part of it, knowing where you're going with QS. It may be beneficial to establish those baseline procedures, knowing where you're going. You're going to customize them in that direction.
The two of you may be saying the same thing.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Another second and third tier question, interesting question from Grand Rapids, because from it we infer something. What is the target date for tier 2 and 3 suppliers to be QS-9000 registered? Implicit in the question is that they will have to be. Is there a date?
No.
Will there be one?
They need to have some honest discussion with their customer.
Okay.
If it is being required by them.
Russ.
Mike, the OEMs at this point in time don't have any plans for dictating third-party registration for suppliers throughout the supply chain below the first tier.
All right. This is a question from Can't Tell. Flint, Michigan. What detail is needed for the work instructions portion? For example, when doing a machine setup, would telling the operator to turn the start button on be too detailed?
If it's making a statement of the obvious, if it's not something that without that statement there could be a failure, that is too detailed. What's necessary is a clear instruction, one that makes sense to the operator, one that provides the proper instruction anything from a flow chart to a well-written procedure will satisfy the requirement of QS-9000, but it's what makes good business sense to you.
I think another piece of that is providing the operators with direction on what happens if things work out wrong. What happens if things don't happen the way they're supposed to? What do I do next? And I think that's the thing that operator instructions can really add value to give them direction in those kinds of situations.
Very good. Question from Fax. We're a company that supplies both production and maintenance lubricants. Are we required to acquire QS-9000? We are currently ISO 9001 certified. Answer?
Yes. If they provide product that ultimately winds up on the vehicle, and he said that he provided both production and maintenance lubrication, that would presume that that lubrication becomes a final part of the vehicle as shipped. Now, if there's any doubt, and there are a few instances where it requires further understanding and interpretation, we would urge them to contact their specific OEM customer.
Interesting questions. Thank you, Russ. We produce our own molds and tools to manufacture automotive components. How should our tooling group be incorporated into our efforts toward QS-9000 for the manufacturing and engineering groups? Will the tooling and equipment supplement resolve this? Answer?
Mike, the tooling and equipment requirements could certainly clarify for that supplier, a satisfactory method of operation or quality system for their tooling and equipment manufacturing branch. But what they need to do right now as a first-tier production parts supplier is look at that particular operation in the same fashion that they would the other operations within their organization. Does it, from a systems and procedure standpoint, comply with the requirements of QS-9000?
Thank you.
We deal with that in Section 2 under manufacturing capabilities. So.
Okay, good. Question from Nebraska. In addition to Chrysler, General Motors, and Ford, we produce exhaust systems for the Japanese auto manufacturers. What can we expect the Japanese auto manufacturers' position to be regarding ISO 9000 and or QS-9000? And by the way, we must have a half dozen other questions asking about offshore automobile manufacturing entities. Where are they with this?
You know, we've had some discussion recently with a couple of those, non-Big Three automotive companies, and they have recently expressed some interest that wasn't at all present a year or so ago. So we're tending to think that based on, if nothing else, input and request from the supplier community as to what those companies' positions will evolve to become in regards to QS-9000, it's prompting a lot of interest within those OEMs to give serious reconsideration of QS-9000.
Okay.
I can just add to that,
yes, sir.
Mike, that today in Japan there are hundreds of companies which are ISO 9000 registered. The interest is a very recent one. In the last year to year and a half, it is increasing at a phenomenal rate all throughout Asia.
Okay.
I might add, too, that we've got a joint launch going in Australia with Ford and ourselves and Toyota and Mitsubishi. So that's a joint there, and there's some work going on in Brazil right now with the QS-9000 involving even the French and the German automotive manufacturers as well. So it looks like it's starting to gain some momentum.
Fax question from Pennsylvania. If a supplier is QS-9000 registered, what is the position of the OEMs, y'all, related to continuing audits, or is a third-party audit going to be accepted?
Well, Mike, as you know, it's probably pretty clear to the audience right now that they cannot get QS-9000 registration without a third-party audit taking place, and that the contract with the registrar or certification body would specify what continuing audits would take place and at what intervals of time.
Okay. Anybody else have a spin on that? All right. Got some really good questions here. Concerning, here's another question on MS-9000. Is that MS-9000, is there a guide or format to produce manuals?
I'm not sure I understand.
Is there a guide or format to produce a manual or manuals?
The MS-9000 manual is published. It's out on the street.
It is the manual.
It is the manual.
You don't have to make one. You can get one.
You can buy one, and you should obtain one through Ford. And I'd say you need to contact Edcore Data Systems for a copy, and probably have some discussion at some point with your material planning and logistics people that you would normally interface with at Ford on that. There's also an accompanying assessment document that complements the MS-9000.
Thank you. From Indiana, in an injection molding facility must the machine groups and, I'm sorry, I can't read it, be included in the calibration system. Can you read that? Machine groups and...
I can't...
Maybe we got the gist of the question. The answer is?
The answer is probably yes. Any measuring device which is a part of production satisfying a requirement to produce that part is required to be under the calibration system.
Interesting question, very global. To help this country continue to lead the world in manufacturing, that's nice, will the big three work with other industries to standardize other types of manufacturing to compete in the global marketplace? Answer.
Yes. Mike, we're currently working with a number of other manufacturing areas that have expressed interest in QS-9000, and we intend to cooperate with all of them to the extent that we could commonize on that single quality system standard. It would be to the benefit of industry as a whole.
This is a step above ISO. That's what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we just recently met with the aerospace and defense people from ASQC's division to just talk about possibilities. So there's some interest outside of automotive.
Yes.
Interesting question from Grand Rapids. I'm concerned that the striking similarities between the government military requirements, this is a mil spec here, may be driving the costs upward that resulted in $200 hammers and $1,000 toilet seats driven by high overhead costs. Implication is that all of this is going to cost more money. True or false?
Absolutely not.
Not true.
Not true. We would hope that that $200 hammer, well, to begin with, we would never spend $200 for a hammer. We would spend $10, and after QS-9000 has been implemented successfully, we'd expect it to be $8.
All right. Is there one example? No. Has the QS-9000 effort of the big three as complex resulted in fewer recalls of vehicles? In other words, is this working? Can we tell yet?
Mike, it's really too soon to tell. Most suppliers are not yet compliant with QS-9000 and don't have, compliance requirements from a third-party registration standpoint for some time. We would expect that with the passage of time, as the suppliers acquire the system's capabilities that are dictated by QS-9000, that we would see, at least from a supplier quality performance standpoint, some improvement that might lead to reductions in recalls.
Russ is going to have the last word on this program today. We've run out of time. I want to thank all of you for just excellent fielding of these very interesting questions, and a special thanks to all of you for sending them in. As our seminar comes to a close, I'd like to remind you to please complete the seminar evaluation form that should be inside your course packet. That feedback is important to National Technological University, and you will indeed influence future programming for the series by completing the information that's requested on the back of the form. What's happened today? Well, in today's seminar, we have learned the significance of QS-9000 to the automotive supplier community. We've learned about the components of the system, the importance of the assessment process, and we've discussed some of the implementation considerations. As well, we've seen the steps that one automotive supplier has taken on its road to QS-9000 certification. Our goal has been simple. We wanted to try to help you understand how QS-9000 could have a positive impact on your organization when incorporated into a solid quality system, and we certainly hope we've had some measure of success with that. We'd like to put in a little plug here. We'd like to ask you to join us next month for a two-part seminar on production and shop floor management that's scheduled for September 13th and September 27th. Please ask the coordinator at your downlink site for more information. And then, coming up in October and November, we'll have seminars on continuous quality improvement developed specifically for small and mid-sized manufacturers. Thanks again for being with us today. Thanks for your very, very quality presentation, and we hope you have a good day.